Chilling surveillance video.
Dragging a young woman.
November 20th, 2015. New Orleans, Louisiana, 4 a.m. A surveillance camera captures a woman stumbling down Mary Street. Seconds later, the scene turns to horror.
What you see is this guy dragging this woman down the block, potentially to be sexually assaulted and raped.
He's trying to force the woman into a car. But at that very moment, a man crossing through the intersection on Margaret Street just happens to see what's going on.
He stops, backs up, turns down the street where this man is dragging this woman. He gets out of his car, trying to help this woman out.
That's when things get really scary.
He's pleading with this guy to leave her alone, and then you're just horrified.
Suddenly, the hooded assailant pulls out a semi-automatic gun, turning it on the Good Samaritan. The commotion wakes local residents.
I heard a guy yelling outside, I don't have any more money.
This whole scenario was fraught with danger.
Then, things take a chilling turn.
The guy shot him in the stomach.
Shots have been fired, and the man who jumped in to help a complete stranger is on the ground. But the gunman isn't done with him.
I saw him try to execute him.
Now this guy tries to shoot him point blank in the head multiple times.
It's difficult to watch, but incredibly, the gun jams repeatedly.
Not once, not twice, but 3 times.
As witnesses frantically dial 911.
Got witnesses stating that they heard a pop. Gentleman shot 1 time in the stomach.
The gunman gives up and flees the scene in this SUV. The woman who he violently dragged down the street appears to be in a state of complete shock. Police respond quickly, rushing both her and the man who tried to save her to the hospital. It turns out the man who's been shot is 25-year-old aspiring doctor Peter Gold, a 4th-year medical student at Tulane University, and he's instantly hailed as a hero.
The medical student who took a bullet to save a stranger.
He could have just kept driving. He could have just called the police and hoped for the best. But he chose to try to help someone who he doesn't even know.
What's more, while the woman is treated for minor injuries and released, Peter is now battling for his life.
The shocking thing to see when you have a friend who's so healthy, just like that, he's in a terrible state. He was rushed into surgery and we really weren't sure what was going to happen next.
When Peter's loved ones see the shocking surveillance video of his vicious attack, they are furious.
My heart was beating in my ears and in my eyes and just seeing red and just like, oh my God. Like this, just watched my friend get murdered right in front of me.
The woman Peter tried to save is traumatized and asks for privacy as she recovers. The video of Peter risking his own life to try and save her instantly goes viral.
Vicious shooting of a Good Samaritan.
Shot in the stomach.
And everything about this brazen attack angers the city of New Orleans, setting off a massive manhunt.
An intensive search this morning for the gunman.
It is clear that this is a dangerous individual who doesn't value the lives of others. Someone knows who he is. Someone knows where he is hiding.
On November 21st, 1 day after Peter is shot, detectives find the SUV his attacker fled in and learn that it was driven by 21-year-old Uric Kane, who has a history of theft and firearms charges.
He is no stranger to law enforcement.
We know who you are, and you need to know that we are going to find you.
But that same day, Kane violently attacks 2 other people in New Orleans.
Kane used a handgun to carjack and then abduct a 41-year-old female and 54-year-old male. And this is where he raped both of them.
During this sexual assault of this male and female couple, he tells them that his nickname is Murder, and then threatens them that if they go to the police, that he will kill them.
How is this going to end? Why did this brave young student risk his own life to help? And will he survive? After a medical student is shot when he attempts to help a woman who is being violently dragged down the street in New Orleans, the city is on edge. And police launch a tireless effort to find the man responsible.
You cannot hide, you cannot run, we are going to catch you.
3 days later, on November 23, 2015, they finally find Uric Kane, hiding out at his girlfriend's home.
He's arrested without further incident and has given our detectives a full confession.
The announcement comes on the heels of an emotional moment in Peter's hospital room.
The doctors had told my parents that there was not a very high chance that I was going to survive. 2 days after surgery, I woke up and my friends and my family were all sitting around my bed in the ICU.
We thought we had lost you. We thought you were dead. All of us.
Peter's loved ones are incredibly relieved he has pulled through, and they are in awe of his actions.
He's always been one to fight for what he believes in. It was an immense moment of courage.
For Peter, it all began as a routine night after a late shift at the hospital.
I was on the phone with my mom while I was driving home from work. Just a quick end of the day catch up. And I told her, hold on 1 second, something's not right.
It was a fleeting moment of chance. What if Peter had been looking the other way as he drove through that intersection? But it only takes one glance to know that he has to do something.
I saw a man dragging a girl down the middle of the road in a chokehold, and I couldn't drive away. You're the only person there.
But from the moment Peter steps out of his car, the situation is frightening.
I started yelling at him, telling him to get off this girl, leave her alone, what are you doing? He immediately dropped her and was turned from him attacking her to him attacking me.
That's when Kane demands money.
I didn't have any cash or anything to give him. I offered him my phone. I said, take this. And at that point, he just said, forget it, I'm gonna kill you. And he shot me point blank in the stomach.
Wounded and bleeding, Peter won't learn until later that Kane was pointing the gun right at his head, repeatedly trying to fire again.
Realizing that part was pretty chilling. After he shot me, I fell to the ground. My back was actually to him. So the only thing I had in my head was to crawl over to my cell phone that had fallen on the ground to call my family.
Peter also has no idea that his mom never hung up. She heard everything.
This whole entire time she was on the phone. She heard the man robbing me. She heard the gunshot go off. It was very, very traumatizing.
While he's recovering, Peter gets a letter from the woman he was trying to protect.
She thanked me for saving her life. She thanked me for doing the right thing when nobody was looking.
And on October 31st, 2016, Uric Kane is sentenced to 54 years behind bars for Peter's shooting and for kidnapping and raping a couple the next day. In a statement, Peter says the ordeal has left him in disbelief, saying he's lucky to be alive, and there is no reason for this terror.
How could somebody act so violently? It's very easy to say, oh, that person's crazy, but we're also part of the problem. I had to get shot in the stomach to really put myself into someone else's shoes and realize that society has failed somebody like him.
Vowing to do something about it, Peter, along with the friends who kept vigil at his bedside, start a foundation called Strong City, which partners with organizations that help at-risk youth.
Our goal is working at the root of the problem, trying to give mentorship and guidance, opportunity to kids so that eventually they don't turn into 20-year-olds that want to act violently.
It's about let's not wait until something terrible happens. It was really an awakening for Peter. It was a reset for him. He was going to use this experience to try to do something positive.
Peter, who is now an orthopedic surgeon, still downplays what he did that night.
I don't feel like a hero, no. I think of it as being in the wrong place at the right time, but I'm happy that I was able to be there at the exact time that he was dragging her down the street. And I'm just very lucky and very grateful to come out on the other side, unscathed and in some ways stronger than I was before.
But to everyone else, there's no question that what Dr. Peter Gold did that night is definitely heroic.
And he should have been probably killed on that night.
I mean, that's pretty heroic to me.
He really hasn't been angry about it the entire time. And he could have been. And for you to pull through and be the same Pete that you are, is pretty miraculous.
Coming up, another crime caught on tape with a surprising outcome.
There was a lot of blood. I was like, okay, the running's over.
It's a shocking scene. A pharmacy robbery gone wrong. And it all happens on Valentine's Day, giving new meaning to defending the one you love.
The one thing motivating a customer to take matters into his own hands.
It's just after 12:30 p.m. in Bradenton, Florida, when a man walks into a pharmacy hiding under a hoodie with a rag over his face. He doesn't seem to care that a customer is already talking to the pharmacist behind the counter.
He's standing there and starts to commit a robbery of the pharmacy.
Then, the masked robber makes a brazen move, leaping right onto the counter, demanding drugs.
This guy jumps up on the counter, starts making an furtive movement towards his waistband.
But what this robber doesn't realize is that this other customer is the pharmacist's boyfriend, who happens to be a Florida State boxing champion. And he's not about to let any danger come to his girlfriend. It turns out that this customer is 25-year-old David West, and he's at the pharmacy visiting his girlfriend, Heather Moran.
We live right down the road from her work, and it's Valentine's Day, so of course I was like, I'll bring her food.
He came in and asked me what I wanted to have for lunch. And then right as I was about to answer him, that the guy came right up behind and got on the counter.
It's scary. In just a matter of seconds, a romantic visit has turned into a terrifying situation. When the robber demands drugs, neither Heather or David can believe what's unfolding right in front of them.
At first, I thought it was a joke. The guy was like, no, this isn't a joke. Give me all your effing oxycodone. He reached down into his pocket and kind of like made the shape of a gun.
And that's when David takes action.
I don't think he saw me, but right when I saw him try to reach into his pants, like he was gonna grab a gun or a knife, I knew I had to react. Stood up and I went at him.
David said something like, hey man, you don't want to do this. David didn't want to fight, he didn't want to hurt the guy, but he wanted to stop the guy from coming at me.
David lurches forcefully at the robber.
I didn't jump on him because I didn't know if he had a weapon. So I was going to try to grab him, subdue him, first and foremost.
As the two men wrestle, banging into pharmacy displays, the robber's shirt is pulled right off his back.
I had no other choice. I started throwing punches. It was pure instinct. There's no way in hell I'm going to let him get my girl.
This boyfriend, he just takes action and starts to fight with him and takes him to the ground, which is super dangerous. He really doesn't know if this guy's armed or not.
But this boxer isn't messing around. His punches are fast and furious.
It took like 4 of them, and he was unconscious.
I kind of felt sorry for the guy.
As Heather dials 911, David keeps the knocked out robber pinned to the ground.
When he came back to, that's when I had to put him in full mount, holding his hands down.
The would-be robber is dazed, and both he and the pharmacy are a mess, as if a full-fledged, hardcore boxing fight has just gone down.
There was so much blood on the ground. We later found out that he had a ruptured eardrum, a broken nose, broken facial bones.
But that's when the unexpected happens.
He's like, oh, crap. I might never see my daughter again.
A professional prize fighter with 2 state titles just happened to be in the store at the time.
When a young man jumps into action to protect his girlfriend at the Florida pharmacy where she works, he's instantly hailed as a hero.
This guy, David West, decides to take action.
For Heather, David's girlfriend, his actions are touching but not surprising.
David's my hero. Very, very brave. So proud of him. I didn't have any doubt that David was gonna protect me. He's fearless. David's fearless, and he has the best heart.
This boxer may pack one powerful punch, but his heart takes over when the robber comes to. What he says is unbelievable.
This guy just tried to rob a store, and this man's crying to me, like begging for me to let him go. He's like, oh crap, I might never see my daughter again. I felt bad, I felt extremely bad.
Still, David knows he can't just let the robber go. So before police arrive and arrest him, he offers some advice.
I told him this is gonna change his life. I said, this is your turning point. Looked right at the guy and I said, you know what? I feel like he just needs help.
Over the next 4 years, David often wonders if his unsolicited advice sank in. As it turns out, it meant more than he ever imagined.
The state of life that I'm in today is due to the time I spent in jail, and I would have died. The irrational lifestyle I was living at that time, I know I would have died.
Believe it or not, this is the same man who jumped onto the counter in that hoodie and is seen in this mugshot. Rob, who asked us to use only his first name to protect his family, was charged with attempted robbery.
I did 13 months in incarceration, but honestly, I'm grateful.
The day he walked into that pharmacy, Rob says he was in a dangerous downward spiral of addiction.
I was 26. Almost 27 years old. I'd never had a speeding ticket. I'd never been in trouble. I had no criminal record. I was an air conditioning technician. I wasn't a bad guy, but I'd say about 6 months before the incident happened, my dad was ran over by a car. I just fell into a reckless streak, and all of a sudden, I don't know, I woke up one day and I was an addict.
And on February 14th, 2016, after his fiancée left him, taking their newborn with her, things hit rock bottom.
This was a Sunday, and Friday I had gotten fired from my job. So no money, and nobody wanted me around. In a 6-month period, I went from having my bills paid, a nice house, 2 nice vehicles, and 401k. So I wake up that morning, it's Valentine's Day, it's my dad's birthday. I'm living in my car. It's all, a chain reaction.
When he walked into the pharmacy, Rob says he didn't really have a plan, and he didn't actually have a weapon. He was just faking it in a desperate attempt to get some drugs he could use and sell.
I owed my drug dealer $1,500. I figured if I went and did that, I could have enough to go give him what I owed him and go crawl in a hole somewhere.
The fight with David left Rob with a 6-inch scar on his forehead and a ruptured eardrum. But he says even if he was out of it, he was never actually knocked unconscious.
He did beat me up, but I didn't get knocked out. All right, I had enough pain medicine and enough opiates in me that you couldn't knock me out.
Now, Rob is married to the same woman who left him right before the pharmacy incident, and they have 2 young children. He also owns his own business. His message to David?
Sorry I tried to rob your girlfriend on Valentine's Day. I mean, thanks for splitting my head open and rupturing my eardrum, But honestly, I'm grateful. I mean, I really am. It is. It's one of the best things that ever happened to me.
I'm happy, He's doing good, and I'm really glad. And I would say I told you so, because the last time I saw him, he was begging for me to let him go and that it was going to be the end of his life. And I was telling him, no, it's not. It's going to be a turning point in your life.
Rob credits David, a rigorous prison reform program, and his faith for making that turning point a reality.
It's been a hard road. Replaying that day, there's so many things that I have today that I couldn't imagine back then that I'm just blessed with by God.
And for very different reasons, Valentine's Day 2016 is one the women in both Rob and David's lives will never forget.
It was embarrassing for her. It was rough for her. I mean, she stood by me, and it was hard for her. Anything I do from here on out on any Valentine's Day, it doesn't matter, always going to be a better Valentine's Day.
I'm the luckiest woman in the world. I've even told David, I said, you don't have to ever get me anything for Valentine's Day ever again. He pretty much earned the get out of Valentine's Day free card.
The story is, to its core, pretty ridiculous.
July 28, 2018 starts out like any other hot summer day in South Texas. People flock to the San Antonio Aquarium to beat the heat. It's home to over 8,000 living aquatic species. Everything seems normal until security cameras capture a truly brazen and bizarre crime.
You can't write a headline like this.
Everyone's out there having a great time looking at the exhibits, and then we see something strange occur.
2 men and a woman with a stroller enter the facility, and the cameras are rolling.
So we have a woman with a baby, we have a guy who's leaning into a fish tank, and now we have a third guy who's with them, kind of in the background. So nothing seems to be really off initially, but it turns out they had something else in mind other than looking at the fish.
Shortly after 2 p.m., the man standing by the tank makes a shocking move.
So now we see this guy, and his shirt's wet, and it looks like he's kind of coddling something. And then we have this other guy who is following behind him.
The 2 men return, and now one of them has something wrapped in a wet, dripping blanket.
What's in that blanket that this guy has?
Whatever it is, the men gingerly place it into the stroller, disguising it as a baby. And then the threesome suddenly hightail it towards the nearest exit. And that's not all. To distract attention from what they're doing, they also cleverly create a disruptive diversion with bleach.
They took our bleach bucket and dumped it into the other exhibit into the system. So we had to react very, very fast.
Now, the animals in the aquarium are in imminent danger.
I was giving instructions to my marine staff as to what to do with the exhibit that just had chemicals poured into it.
Some of the staff race to the parking lot, while others quickly scramble to pull the aquarium's surveillance footage to see if they can figure out what was taken from the tank.
There it goes. Instantly, we knew it was a horn shark because we go in there and we're like, that's Helen. Like, he took Helen.
The staff is shocked when they realize it's their beloved Miss Helen. She's a juvenile female horn shark, a species native to Western North America.
What made Miss Helen so special was she was our only horn shark.
They are furious and stunned at the audacity of these brazen thieves.
They just waited for an opportune time and they scooped up Helen and put her in the stroller.
With the aquarium in chaos and the suspects on the move, an urgent call goes out to the Leon Valley Police Department.
The employees called us and said that they had had a shark that was stolen. The funny part was it was Shark Week, and I thought they were messing with me.
Police are wondering, is this real? Did someone actually kidnap a shark?
I mean, first of all, when you call, hey, somebody stole my shark, you know, stole what? stole our shark. It was such an odd case for them.
Many people don't realize that there's a large black market for exotic animals being trafficked within the United States. And business lately with exotic animals is thriving.
As police race to the aquarium, the trio of suspects make it outside to the parking lot, where more cameras are waiting, and so are aquarium staff.
They were confronted by an employee that saw them get dripping. She confronted him, tried to talk to him.
I asked him if he would allow me to search his car, that we had suspicions that something was stolen and that we needed to search it. And he said no. He said he needed to take his baby to the doctor immediately and that he had spilled a cup of water in his stroller, which is why it was leaking.
Jenny is certain the man is lying, but they can't prove what's hidden in the stroller is actually a shark. And what if it really is a child?
We can't take a stroller and a child. We were in a very compromised situation.
He's a big guy. I didn't want to physically challenge that or anything, so we did write down his license plate and let them go.
So the thieves race out of the parking lot, but the aquarium employees are already on the move.
I immediately called the Leon Valley Police Department and reported their license plate number.
Leon Valley Police are able to trace the license plate to an address 20 miles northeast of the aquarium. It looks like an ordinary suburban house on an ordinary suburban cul-de-sac. But what's inside is nothing short of extraordinary.
I've been involved in law enforcement for over 25 years, and this is one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen.
A trio of thieves took Shark Week too far.
On July 28, 2018, the San Antonio Aquarium becomes the scene of a truly bizarre crime.
They walk right into a busy Texas aquarium and then right out with a live shark.
Why would anyone want to kidnap a shark?
And it's all been caught on camera in broad daylight.
When I actually saw the video, I was just completely in shock. He reached in with his hands and pulled it out.
In the surveillance, you can literally see them scoop up the animal. And you would think, okay, normally catching a shark is not that easy. However, we're an interactive facility. So as guests do come through the door, they are able to touch animals with 2 fingers on the back. We train them for desensitization, so they're very much used to being handled.
The daring crime shocks everyone.
I mean, I've been a policeman a long time. I never saw something so brazen and really so stupid for somebody to do something like that. You'd think they were some young kids or something like that, but no, they were middle-aged Americans.
Police traced the license plate to the home of Anthony Shannon.
He wasn't the one who actually physically stolen the shark, but he was the driver of the vehicle, and he'd been arrested multiple times. He was an animal enthusiast.
And when they open his garage, they are stunned at what they find inside.
We went into his garage to recover the shark, and it was beautiful inside. It was almost like the aquarium itself.
He actually had a whole setup for aquatics. And he had various other fish species in there. He was in a saltwater system with other saltwater fish. He had knowledge about saltwater. He had knowledge about life support systems.
I can't remember how many hundreds of gallons his main tank was, but it was huge.
Anthony Shannon and his 2 companions are arrested and charged with theft. And less than 72 hours after the heist, police summoned Jamie to the garage to make sure the shark they found is indeed the aquarium's precious Miss Helen.
That one right there? Yes. Okay, you're positive?
Positive. And when I catch her, I'll show you that she's female.
Okay, very well.
So, males will have claspers hanging up from the bottom. She clearly does not have any sort of claspers.
Okay, you're 100%. You're identifying that shark?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
I loved that shark, and I could definitely ID her and certain characteristics that she had and things like that. I was like, that's my shark, and I'm bringing her home.
And as it turns out, Miss Helen isn't the only seemingly cold-blooded creature Jamie is able to identify. She realizes she knows one of the suspects.
This gentleman, I could recognize him straight off the bat because he had previously reached out to me to test my water, trying to impersonate a salt company called Instant Ocean. And he did come here at one point in time to meet me in person. And from the get-go, it just seemed something was very odd and just out of place. And so that's why I could easily identify him.
It seems Anthony Shannon had been casing out the aquarium for weeks in his attempt to pull off the perfect shark heist.
Well, they did a lot of planning. What they didn't take into account and what they should have taken into account was the fact that there was video cameras and there was people there. And at the end of the day, crime doesn't pay, and you're eventually going to get caught no matter how well you think you've done in planning. Your day's going to come.
Today, Miss Helen swims free once again in the aquarium. And now, she's a local hero.
She became very, very popular, and we didn't want anybody trying to take her again. So we now have more horn sharks. She is in a camouflage of other horn sharks.
And it's a reminder to everyone just how valuable exotic animals have become.
This is one of the strangest stories that I've heard in my many years in law enforcement. The illegal trading of exotic animals happens more than one might think. You might not know what your neighbor has in their house.
And coming up, a daring escape sets off another intense manhunt.
You hear the stories that happen when people get out of prison. This is very, very dangerous.
It's a brazen scene that looks like something out of a movie.
Geez, this is really happening. It was kind of crazy.
It happens on Saturday, October 6, 2018, just after 9 p.m. at the Metro County Jail in Louisville, Kentucky. At first, it looks like routine evening activity outside the jail's kitchen.
An inmate worker wheeling trash cans from the kitchen out to the loading dock.
But then, a startling surprise.
The 2 garbage cans open and out pop 2 prisoners.
You see the lids kind of pop up and you see the 2 men are literally in the trash cans.
The 2 inmates dart behind a dumpster and rip off their orange jumpsuits. Then, one of them runs back to grab something from the trash can. With no signs of anyone around, it looks like they're about to make a run for it.
The area beside Metro Corrections was literally a door that went out to a platform where you put the garbage cans, and then there was a ramp where you can walk down. There's no fence, there's no gate. It's very open space, and if you can run fast, unless there's somebody there to catch you, they're probably not going to catch you.
And these bold inmates don't even bother to run. They casually stroll away as if they're doing nothing wrong. And then, they're gone. Just like that, these 2 prisoners have pulled off a bold getaway.
It's probably one of the most audacious escapes in contemporary history.
You immediately begin to think about El Chapo and his escape from prison in Mexico, where he was wheeled out in a laundry cart.
The minimum security jail, which houses about 2,000 inmates, has more than 300 cameras. And Mark Bolton, who at the time was the director of the Louisville Metro Department of Corrections, is furious.
We have a lot of cameras. It was a kind of a sick-to-your-stomach anger, just a lack of fundamental corrections 101.
Where were the people who should have been watching these 2 prisoners?
Obviously failed to look in those trash cans, allowing those trash cans to go out to the loading dock without even being opened or looked at.
How silly that it should be that easy to just break out of prison on a little garbage can. Something in our system has really broken down for it to be that easy to break out of prison.
There's always that movie where you see the prisoners escaping through a sewer and all that kind of thing. These characters actually did it, but they did it in plastic garbage cans.
And now, 2 potentially dangerous inmates are on the loose in Louisville. And for Bolton, the pressure is on to figure out who they are.
I immediately began to think, what were these guys in custody for? What's their criminal history? What is the risk to the community now that they've escaped?
Time is absolutely of the essence. We don't know where they're going. Who are they going to meet up with? It is urgent that they be located and recaptured.
A massive manhunt is launched to find them, and their getaway is all over the news.
A daring escape out of garbage cans.
Authorities say the escapees were rolled out in garbage cans.
It was a big event. It was played on national TV.
A Kentucky jailbreak that was caught on camera.
It was also embarrassment. In my 40-year career, we've never had an incident like that.
But Mark doesn't have time to be angry.
You got 2 inmates that are on the loose, obviously, that don't want to be apprehended.
And authorities are about to find out just how far these escapees will go to avoid going back to jail.
We hear the loud boom and a crash. I thought the guy was dead.
Authorities in Kentucky are searching for 2 inmates.
In October 2018, 2 prisoners make a bold escape from the Louisville Metro Corrections facility.
A unique way to escape prison.
The 2 men who pull off their getaway by hiding in garbage cans that are wheeled out of the jail's kitchen are quickly identified as 27-year-old Justin Stumler and 38-year-old Jeremy Hunt. Both are minimum security inmates who work in the kitchen. Hunt was arrested 4 months earlier on burglary charges. Stumler had been in for 2 months on charges that included theft and drug possession. But with both of them now on the run, the stakes are high.
One of them had a firearms history. You betcha we're really concerned about what they might do. I mean, they don't want to get caught. So yeah, it's high drama, and you're having a sleepless night that night.
So you're at home, safe and sound, you think, but unbeknownst to you, there's 2 dangerous criminals out there just running around free. It kind of opens up Pandora's box of your greatest nightmares. And so you can't really breathe again until they catch them and get them locked back up again.
At the jail, there's another concern. How did they pull this off? Did the escapees have help from the inside?
We think that it was coordinated at least amongst the inmates. It's staff complacency, and staff complacency can get somebody killed.
Bolton and his staff at the jail immediately set up a high-tech command center to investigate the escape and locate the runaway prisoners.
With software that allows us to listen to inmate phone calls, to use Google mapping, we were able to determine they had access to cell phones. And once we began to access those cell phone numbers, we were able to ping those cell phone towers, and we just began to track them. We were able to track them almost in real time.
But by the next day, Sunday, October 7th, authorities still haven't been able to locate the escapees.
They know we've got a beat on them. It's on the news.
Their escape was caught on camera.
Authorities still were searching for the men.
So I think that they were probably scared, changing their appearance, changing vehicles, and they would get into one vehicle and meet an acquaintance somewhere else and then get into that vehicle. And so we were one step behind them almost the entire time.
With police on high alert, the entire city of Louisville is on edge as the prisoners elude capture.
Now they're running through the community. There is no more control. And who might they hurt and what might they damage on their way to freedom?
By the morning of Monday, October 8th, the inmates have been on the loose for 36 hours. There have been glimpses of them near a high school Saturday night and again on Sunday morning walking towards another county. But every time a tip comes in, they're gone by the time police arrive. Then, finally, there's a promising lead. An anonymous tip that Justin Stumler plans to meet a family member at a fast food restaurant. They quickly swarm in, and when they spot Stumler, they corner him and arrest him. Now, only Jeremy Hunt remains at large. But a few hours later, after he attempts to use stolen credit cards at a gas station, police get eyes on him too, driving a stolen white truck.
He was driving back towards the Louisville area, and he was spotted and got into a high-speed chase with Meade County law enforcement personnel.
And that's when things get really scary. Hunt seems to be in a panic, driving erratically through local neighborhoods. As innocent people suddenly find themselves in danger, there are comments on the police department's Facebook page like, "The guy nearly killed me, missed me by an inch."
Somebody out on his lunch break is almost struck by the prisoner fleeing in a stolen car.
We heard the car chase on the scanner. The assignment editor said, hey, we have several cars that have been hit along the highway.
It's intense. Numerous agencies join the chase before it finally comes to a dramatic end. At 3:45 p.m. at a busy intersection, there is a terrifying 5-car collision.
The driver literally plowed through a couple intersections. There was glass everywhere. It looked pretty bad.
The vehicle driven, according to witnesses, by that escaped inmate.
Rudy Sweeney is working nearby.
We hear the loud boom. I thought the guy was, dead. I didn't know what to think. And so I was just yelling, help, help.
Nobody is dead, but at least 3 innocent bystanders are injured and rushed to the hospital. The man who caused all the chaos, escaped prisoner Jeremy Hunt, tries to make a run for it on foot, but he doesn't get very far. And now, both Hunt and Stumler are back behind bars.
In the end, we were able to get these guys back in custody very, very quickly.
Did you really think you weren't actually gonna get caught, guys? Come on.
Both prisoners end up with far longer sentences than they would have had they not tried to pull off the audacious garbage can escape.
They received about another 5-year sentence, in addition to the charges they were already in custody for at the time.
So on the one hand, you're really clever, right? But on the other hand, you're really, really stupid. Because what you've done is complicated things and gotten yourself more time. Not so ingenious.
3 other inmates who helped orchestrate the escape are also disciplined. And with the looming question of how it happened in the first place, there were penalties for the people who should have kept a closer eye on the runaways.
The 2 officers that were on duty in that duty post received very, very severe discipline and extended suspension time.
Bolton has retired now, but says this is an escape he will never forget.
Very brazen escape. And I'm still angry about that, and I always will be.
The confession came at 2:17 in the morning, under flickering fluorescent lights, in a room that smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, when a man who had spent 30 years blending into the background leaned forward, folded his shaking hands, and said, almost gently, "I never stopped thinking about her," and with that single sentence the silence of a small New York town shattered all over again. In 1992, Maple Hollow was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and high school football scores made the front page, where everyone knew the mailman by name, and the loudest sound after dark was the wind scraping branches against clapboard siding. But on October 14th, that illusion cracked open when 17-year-old Emily Harper didn't come home. She had left her shift at the diner just after 9, apron folded under her arm, a smear of cherry pie filling still on her wrist, telling her coworker she'd see her in the morning, and then she walked out into the cool autumn night and vanished into a darkness that has never fully lifted. Her car was found 2 days later at the edge of Miller's Field, parked crooked, driver's door slightly ajar, keys gone, purse still on the passenger seat, the radio frozen between stations, hissing static into the empty air as if trying to say something no one could understand. The sheriff at the time called it concerning but not conclusive, but the volunteers who fanned out across cornfields and creek beds felt it in their bones. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and the town that prided itself on safety now whispered the words no one wanted to say out loud. Abduction, foul play, cold case in the making. Emily was not the kind of girl who disappeared. Honor roll student, choir singer, babysitter for half the neighborhood. She had college brochures stacked neatly on her desk and a curfew she rarely tested. Her parents, Daniel and Ruth Harper, stood on their porch that first night scanning the tree line with flashlights, calling her name into the dark until their voices cracked, and the only answer was the low hum of crickets and the distant bark of a dog who would not stop. Detectives canvassed the town with clipboards and tight smiles. They questioned classmates, ex-boyfriends, drifters passing through on Route 17. They dusted the car for prints and found plenty, but most belonged to friends, family, the ordinary fingerprints of a normal teenage life. There were no signs of struggle inside the vehicle, no blood, no broken glass, just that open door and the uneasy feeling that someone had interrupted something mid-breath. A trucker reported seeing a pickup idling near Miller's Field that night, dark paint, rust along the wheel well, but couldn't recall the plate. Another witness claimed to hear a scream around 9:30, sharp and sudden. Though wind can play tricks on memory, and fear has a way of editing sound. Days turned into weeks. The search dogs lost the scent near the dirt road that cut behind the field, a road that led toward dense woods, and, beyond that, the river. Divers went in twice. They found shopping carts, beer cans, a bicycle frame, but no sign of Emily. The sheriff held a press conference on the courthouse steps, hat in hand, promising relentless pursuit of the truth, promising that Maple Hollow would not become another headline, not another unsolved tragedy, and yet the cameras packed up, the reporters left. And the town was left with a growing word that felt heavier each day: cold case. Rumors bloomed like mold in damp corners. Some said she'd run away with a secret boyfriend. Others whispered about a traveling construction crew that had been working just outside town. A few pointed fingers at someone closer to home, someone who had smiled too quickly during questioning, someone who seemed a little too interested in the search maps taped to the diner wall. But suspicion without proof is just noise, and noise does not hold up in court. The case file thickened with statements, timelines, grainy photographs, and still there was nothing solid enough to grip. By winter, snow had erased the last footprints in Miller's Field. The Harper house went quiet. Christmas lights stayed boxed in the attic. Emily's bedroom remained untouched, her bed made, her posters straightened, as if she might walk back in any moment and complain about the cold. Detectives followed every lead. They traced phone calls from the diner payphone. They pulled records from gas stations along the highway. They even brought in a profiler from the city who spoke in careful phrases about opportunity and escalation and the possibility that the offender was local, comfortable, hidden in plain sight. Hidden in plain sight. The phrase lodged itself in the town's throat. Years slipped by. The sheriff retired. A new generation grew up hearing about the girl who vanished by the field. The file was moved from an active drawer to a back cabinet, stamped with a term that feels like surrender. Inactive pending new evidence. But for the Harpers, there was no inactive. There was only morning and night, and the empty chair at the kitchen table. They kept her number listed in the phone book long after most people had stopped using landlines, just in case. Just in case she found a way to call. In 2004, a tip came in from an inmate in Rikers Island claiming his cellmate had boasted about a girl from upstate, about a field, and a truck, and a scream swallowed by wind. Detectives drove down, recorded statements, chased the story through layers of half-truths and jailhouse bravado, only to discover it was a bargaining chip, a desperate attempt to shave years off a sentence. The lead collapsed, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste and a renewed sense that the truth was always just out of reach. Then came the flood of 2011, when the river swelled beyond its banks and chewed away at the soil near Miller's Field. For a brief, breathless moment, hope twisted with dread as search teams combed the newly exposed ground, every fragment of bone scrutinized, every scrap of fabric bagged and labeled. But the remains they found belonged to an animal, long buried, and the case slipped back into shadow, stubborn and silent. The town changed. New shops opened on Main Street. Old houses were torn down. Children who had once helped staple missing person flyers to telephone poles grew into adults who warned their own kids about walking alone at night. And always, beneath the surface, the story lingered, resurfacing whenever another young woman went missing somewhere else in the state, whenever the words "cold case" flashed across a television screen, whenever someone drove past Miller's Field and felt an inexplicable chill. Daniel Harper died in 2018 without answers. At his funeral, people spoke softly about patience and faith and the promise that truth reveals itself in time, but Ruth Harper stood by the casket with a photograph of Emily pressed against her chest and wondered how much time truth required. She attended every community forum about unsolved crimes. She wrote letters to the district attorney. She refused to let the file gather dust in peace. And then, 30 years after the night that cracked Maple Hollow open, a man walked into the county sheriff's office just before closing. He was 58, balding, with tired eyes and a maintenance uniform still dusted with drywall. He asked to speak to someone about something that happened a long time ago. The deputy at the desk assumed it was a minor theft, a decades-old dispute, but when the man mentioned Miller's Field, mentioned 1992, mentioned a girl who worked at the diner, the air in the room shifted, heavy and electric. They brought him into interview room 2. They turned on the recorder. He gave his name, Thomas Keller, lifelong resident, no serious criminal record, the kind of man who waved during parades and fixed broken railings at the church without being asked. He stared at the tabletop for a long time before speaking again, as if measuring the cost of each word, and outside the building the town carried on, unaware that the past was stirring. That a cold case once thought frozen solid was about to fracture under the weight of a confession no one saw coming. Thomas Keller did not look like a man about to detonate 30 years of silence. He looked like a man exhausted from carrying something too heavy for too long, his maintenance boots leaving faint chalk prints on the gray tile as he shifted in the metal chair. The recorder's red light blinking steadily between him and the detectives who suddenly understood that this was no routine walk-in. This was the word every cold case investigator both longs for and fears breakthrough. He asked for water. His hands trembled as he lifted the paper cup, a ripple moving through the surface before he took a sip. Detective Alvarez, who had inherited the Harper file 5 years earlier and knew every page by heart, Every grainy photograph and every dead-end tip kept her voice level, almost gentle, as she asked him to start from the beginning. Keller nodded once, slow, like a man stepping onto thin ice. "I was there," he said, and the words did not echo, they thudded, heavy and final. "That night, October 14th, I saw her." The room tightened. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, then faded, and for a second it felt like the town itself was holding its breath. Keller explained that in 1992, he was 24, living in a rented trailer just beyond Miller's Field, working odd construction jobs, drifting between paychecks. He owned a dark blue pickup with rust along the wheel well. The details snapped like a live wire. 30 years earlier, a trucker had described a similar vehicle idling near the field. At the time, it had been just another blurred possibility in a sea of maybes. Now it had a name. He claimed he had pulled off the dirt road that night to smoke, to clear his head after an argument with his girlfriend. He said he saw Emily's car parked crooked, driver's door open, dome light glowing like a beacon in the dark. He said he thought she might need help. He said he walked toward her. The detectives did not interrupt. They let the silence stretch, because silence is a pressure chamber, and under pressure, truth either hardens or cracks. "She was scared," Keller whispered. "I didn't mean to scare her. I grabbed her arm." Grabbed her arm. The phrase hung in the air, sterile and small compared to what it implied. Alvarez leaned forward, eyes sharp now, and asked him why. Keller swallowed. Said he had been drinking. Said he thought she was beautiful. Said he wasn't thinking straight. The justifications came thin and brittle, like old paper crumbling at the edges. He described a struggle. A scream swallowed by wind. Her trying to pull away, his grip tightening, panic blooming fast and hot. He said she slipped, hit her head against the side of the car. He insisted it was an accident, that the sound of bone against metal had shocked him back to himself, that he knelt beside her calling her name, even though he claimed he had not known it then. He said she wasn't moving. Detective Alvarez asked the question that had been waiting for 3 decades. "What did you do next?" Keller's eyes filled, but whether with remorse or self-preservation, it was impossible to tell. He said he panicked. Said he dragged her toward the tree line because headlights appeared in the distance. Said he only meant to hide until the road cleared. He described the woods in detail, the fallen oak near the creek bend, the soft ground beyond it. He said he left her there. Said he drove home shaking. Said he returned at dawn, and she was gone.
Gone.
The word ricocheted off the walls. Gone where? Gone how? The detectives pressed him. Had someone else taken her? Had she regained consciousness? Had he moved her again? Keller insisted he never touched her after that first night. He swore he had searched the woods at sunrise, terrified of what he might find, and found nothing but churned leaves and his own footprints half erased by dew. It was a story that both solved and deepened the mystery. If he was telling the truth, then Emily had been alive, possibly injured but breathing, in those woods. If he was lying, then the lie was crafted to soften a harsher reality. Either way, the timeline that had gathered dust since 1992 was suddenly alive, twitching with new possibility. The sheriff was called back to the office. The district attorney was notified. By dawn, a quiet task force had assembled, pulling the Harper file from archives, laying its contents across a long conference table like pieces of a puzzle finally offered a missing edge. Keller's 1992 address matched the trailer beyond Miller's Field. His old truck registration confirmed the color, the model. There had been no search warrant executed on his property back then. He had not been on the primary suspect list. He had been interviewed briefly, yes, but only as one of dozens of local men. He had said he was home that night. No one had pushed harder. Now they would. Search teams moved before the town woke. They cordoned off the wooded area Keller described, this time with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs trained far beyond the capabilities of the early 90s. Yellow tape fluttered between trees that had grown taller and thicker over 30 years, roots twisting through layers of forgotten seasons. Reporters caught wind by mid-morning. A helicopter circled low. The words flashed across local news screens. 1,992 cold case reopened. Surprise confession. Miller's field sealed off. Ruth Harper stood at her kitchen counter when the call came. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. 30 years of waiting had trained her not to hope too quickly, not to let rumors take root in fragile soil, but this was different. A name. A confession. She gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened and asked the only question that mattered. Did he say where she is? In the woods, the first dog alerted near the fallen oak Keller had described. Officers marked the spot. Shovels cut into earth that had frozen and thawed 1,000 times since 1992. Layers of soil peeled back, dark and damp. Every scrape of metal against rock sent a jolt through the gathered crowd of investigators. Hours passed. Nothing but roots and stones. Then, 30 feet closer to the creek bend, another alert. Stronger this time. Persistent. The handler's voice shifted, low and certain. Digging resumed. A fragment surfaced first. Fabric. Faded but unmistakably human-made. Then a sliver of bone. The forest seemed to recoil. Forensic teams moved in with gloved hands and careful breaths. The remains were partial, scattered, disturbed by time and water and animals, but enough to suggest that someone had not simply left a body in the open and walked away. There were signs of burial, shallow and hurried. There were signs of movement after the initial concealment. The story Keller told, of leaving her and returning to find her gone, began to fracture under the weight of the soil itself. Back in interview room 2, Keller was informed of the discovery. His face drained of color. He insisted he had not dug any grave. Insisted he had not returned after that dawn search. The detectives watched him closely now, no longer patient, no longer gentle. They laid out photographs from the excavation, the recovered fabric consistent with the diner uniform Emily had worn that night. They asked him to explain the burial. His breathing quickened. Sweat beaded along his hairline. I didn't bury her, he said again, but the certainty had thinned. Under sustained questioning, small inconsistencies emerged, times that shifted by an hour, distances that grew shorter or longer depending on the retelling. He admitted he had driven back to the field not once but twice that week, circling at night to make sure no police were there. He admitted he had lied in 1992 when asked about his whereabouts. He admitted fear had guided every choice he made. By evening, Maple Hollow was no longer a quiet town with an old ghost story. It was a live wire of flashing cameras and hushed conversations. Neighbors replayed decades of interactions with Thomas Keller, barbecues, church services, borrowed tools, searching for clues they might have missed. The word cold case no longer felt abstract. It felt personal, invasive, like a stranger who had been sitting at the table all along. And as the sun set behind Miller's field, casting long shadows over freshly turned earth, the realization settled in with chilling clarity. A confession had cracked open the past, but it had not yet delivered the full truth. And somewhere between Keller's trembling words and the shallow grave in the woods lay the final, devastating answer that Maple Hollow had been waiting for since 1992. The rain started just after midnight, a thin, cold drizzle that turned the excavation site into dark, clinging mud, as if the earth itself were reluctant to give up what it had guarded for 3 decades, and under portable floodlights investigators moved carefully, reverently. Every brushstroke against bone a reminder that this was no longer just a cold case file but a human life interrupted, a daughter whose absence had shaped an entire town. Forensic anthropologists arrived before dawn, their breath visible in the chill as they knelt beside the shallow grave. The remains were incomplete, ribs fractured, skull showing a distinct depression along the right temporal bone. Not a simple fall against a car door. Not a minor accident. The fracture pattern suggested force. Blunt force. Repeated or, at least, deliberate. The kind of injury that does not happen by chance in the dark. Detective Alvarez stood just beyond the tape, watching gloved hands lift fragments into labeled evidence bags, her mind replaying Keller's words. She slipped. She hit her head. I panicked. The skull told a different story. The bone carried memory even when witnesses failed. At the sheriff's office, Keller had been placed in a holding cell after hours of questioning, not yet charged, not yet formally arrested for homicide, but no longer free to walk back into Maple Hollow like an ordinary man. He sat on a narrow bench, staring at cinderblock walls, unaware that the soil he claimed never to have disturbed was now contradicting him in quiet, scientific language. By mid-morning, the medical examiner confirmed what the town already feared and yet needed to hear spoken aloud. The remains were consistent with a female in her late teens, approximate time of death aligning with October 1992. Dental records would take days to finalize, but in their bones everyone knew. Emily Harper had not vanished into thin air. She had been here, buried within walking distance of where her car was found, hidden in plain sight. News vans lined Main Street. Reporters spoke in urgent tones about a major cold case breakthrough, about a surprise confession rocking a small New York community. Social media erupted with archived photos of Emily in her choir robe, smiling in a way that felt almost accusatory now, as if asking how it had taken 30 years to reach this moment. Ruth Harper arrived at the sheriff's office, wearing the same navy coat she had worn to every vigil. She did not cry when officials told her the remains were likely her daughter's. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and asked, "Was she alone?" The question cut through the procedural language, through the forensic terminology. Was she alone when she died? No one could answer that yet. Back in interview room 2, Keller was brought out again, wrists cuffed in front of him. This time there was no paper cup of water waiting, no soft tone. Photographs were placed on the table one by one. The skull fracture, the shallow grave, the disturbed soil layers indicating multiple episodes of digging. Alvarez did not accuse. She presented. She let the images speak. "You said you left her there," she said quietly. "You said you never buried her." Keller's gaze flickered over the photos, and then away. His jaw tightened. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Outside the room, officers watched through the one-way glass, every muscle in their bodies attuned to the slightest shift. "I was scared," Keller finally whispered, and the words sounded smaller now, stripped of their earlier performance. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Go that far. As if there were degrees of tragedy that could be measured and negotiated. He began to revise his story, not in sweeping admissions, but in careful, incremental steps, each one dragging him closer to a truth he had buried as shallowly as the body in the woods. He admitted that when Emily tried to run, he grabbed her from behind. Admitted she fought harder than he expected. Admitted he pushed her, harder than he realized. The first blow to her head, he insisted, was against the car. The second, he could not clearly remember. The detectives did not miss that detail the second. When asked directly if he struck her, he hesitated just long enough to make the silence incriminating. "I might have," he said. "I was panicking." Panic does not explain a grave. Confronted again with the evidence of burial, Keller's composure cracked further. He confessed to returning the next night with a shovel from his trailer. He said he couldn't sleep, couldn't stand the thought of her lying exposed. He said he dug quickly, shallow, because the ground was hard, because he feared being seen. He said he told himself she was already gone. He never checked for a pulse. He never called for help. He chose concealment over rescue. The admission landed like a physical blow. 30 years of uncertainty narrowed into a single, devastating decision made in the dark. But even as he spoke, inconsistencies remained. The forensic team had noted binding marks on fragments of wrist bone, faint but present. There was fiber recovered near the remains not consistent with Emily's clothing. When pressed about these details, Keller's eyes widened with something that looked like genuine surprise or fear. "I didn't tie her up," he said quickly. Too quickly. The possibility bloomed in the room like smoke. Was there someone else? Had Keller acted alone? Or was the confession an attempt to control a narrative that was far more complicated, far more damning? Investigators reopened every corner of 1992. They pulled old witness statements, re-examined timelines, cross-checked names that had once been cleared too easily. The construction crew that had worked near Route 17. The ex-boyfriend who had moved out of state weeks after the disappearance. The trucker who saw the pickup. Every thread was tugged again, this time with modern forensic tools and the urgency of a case no longer theoretical. Meanwhile, the lab expedited DNA testing on the recovered remains. Within 48 hours, confirmation came back definitive. Emily Harper had been found. The cold case was no longer about a missing person. It was about murder. The charge was filed by afternoon, second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, providing false statements. Thomas Keller was led out of the sheriff's office in handcuffs as cameras flashed, his face pale beneath the strobe of attention he had avoided for decades. Neighbors who once waved at him now stared in disbelief. Some wept openly. Others shook their heads, repeating the same stunned refrain. He seemed so normal. But normal is a mask that fits too many faces. At a candlelight vigil that evening, townspeople gathered in Miller's Field for the first time since the discovery. The air smelled of wet earth and wax. Ruth Harper stood at the front, a single photograph of Emily held against her chest. She thanked the investigators. She said her daughter could finally come home. Her voice did not waver until the very end when she added, "But I still don't know if that's the whole truth." Those words lingered long after the candles burned low. Because in a case that had slept for 30 years, a confession was not the same as clarity. The forensic report hinted at restraint. The grave suggested more calculation than Keller's narrative of panic. And somewhere in the shifting details of his story, in the moments he claimed not to remember, lay the possibility that the cold case had not simply been solved but cracked open, revealing layers no one had prepared to face. As night fell again over Maple Hollow, the woods beyond Miller's Field stood silent, their secrets partially unearthed, partially intact, and the town understood with a chilling certainty that while an arrest had shocked the community, the full story of what happened in October 1992 was still unfolding, still tightening like a knot that refused to come undone. The word murder traveled faster than the rain that soaked Miller's Field, faster than the flashing headlines, faster than the disbelief spreading across Maple Hollow's narrow streets, and by the time Thomas Keller was processed into county lockup, the town had already rewritten 30 years of memory around a single, suffocating truth. Emily Harper had not disappeared, she had been killed, and someone they had lived beside had carried that knowledge like a shadow. Inside the forensic lab, the remains told their story without emotion, without hesitation. The skull fracture was not singular. There were microfractures radiating outward, consistent with repeated impact. The angle suggested force from above, not the sideways strike of an accidental fall. Soil embedded within the nasal cavity indicated she had been face down at some point, earth pressing into airways. The shallow grave showed two distinct layers of disturbance, first hurried, uneven, then later reopened, deeper, more deliberate. Panic might explain the first. The second required something colder. Detective Alvarez stood over enlarged photographs pinned to a corkboard, red string connecting timelines that had once felt abstract and now pulsed with consequence. Keller's first version: a stumble, a single blow, abandonment. Second version: a push, maybe two impacts, a return with a shovel the following night. But the burial pattern suggested he had returned more than once. The soil compaction indicated settling and redigging weeks apart, not hours. Someone had checked on that grave. Someone had adjusted it. When confronted again, Keller's breathing turned ragged. He had slept little. His public defender sat beside him now, silent but watchful. Alvarez laid out the forensic findings with clinical precision. 2 layers of burial. Evidence of repositioning. Possible restraints. She did not accuse him of lying. She let the science erode him. "I went back," Keller admitted finally, voice thin. "A few days later. I thought animals might. I just wanted to make sure she stayed covered." Stayed covered. As if concealment were an act of mercy. He denied restraints. Denied tying her wrists. Yet faint circular impressions on the ulna fragments suggested compression consistent with cord or rope. Fiber analysis revealed synthetic strands, blue and yellow, microscopically small but present. Keller's old trailer, long since demolished, had been documented in archived photos. On a shelf in the background of one image, a coil of blue and yellow utility rope. Coincidence is a fragile defense. Investigators tracked down the man who had purchased Keller's trailer in 1996. The property had been renovated, flooring replaced, walls repainted, but a crawl space remained untouched. With a warrant, they searched it, flashlights cutting through dust and spiderwebs. Near a support beam, they found an old shovel head, rusted, detached from its handle. Soil clung stubbornly along its edge. It was bagged, tagged, rushed to the lab. Maple Hollow watched in collective disbelief as details surfaced daily. The church where Keller once repaired pews released a statement expressing shock. The hardware store owner recalled selling him rope in the early 90s, but could not remember the exact date. High school classmates of Emily gave interviews, their adult voices cracking as they described the last time they saw her laughing in the hallway. Ruth Harper did not speak to cameras anymore. She visited the sheriff's office privately, asking for updates, studying the evidence photos with a steadiness that unsettled even seasoned detectives. "Did she suffer?" she asked once, barely audible. The medical examiner explained that the cranial trauma could have rendered Emily unconscious quickly, but the presence of soil in her airway left open a possibility no mother should have to imagine. The room fell silent. Ruth nodded once, absorbing pain like a tide that refused to recede. In jail, Keller's story shifted again, under mounting pressure. He admitted to bringing rope that night, not to restrain, he insisted, but because it was already in the truck. He said during the struggle it might have tangled around her wrists. Might have. He clung to ambiguity like a life raft. Yet phone records from 1992, reanalyzed with modern enhancement techniques, revealed a brief outgoing call from a payphone near Miller's Field at 9:42 p.m., placed to a number later connected to Keller's then-girlfriend. The call lasted 12 seconds. No one had pursued it deeply back then. Technology had been limited. Now it loomed large. When asked about the call, Keller's composure fractured. He admitted he had phoned his girlfriend that night but claimed it was earlier, unrelated. The timestamp said otherwise. The proximity to the estimated time of death tightened the noose of chronology. What had he said in those 12 seconds? There was no recording, only billing data, a ghost of a conversation that might have contained panic, confession, or instruction. Investigators located the former girlfriend, now living 3 states away. She remembered the call. She remembered his voice, breathless, urgent. "I messed up," he had said. Something bad happened. She thought he meant a fight, a bar altercation. He refused to elaborate and hung up. She had not heard from him again for days. At the time, she had dismissed it as drunken drama. Now, under oath, her recollection sharpened into damning context. Each revelation chipped away at the accidental narrative Keller tried to preserve. The blunt force trauma, the burial revisions, the rope fibers, the phone call. Panic was no longer an explanation, it was a starting point. Yet one question refused to settle. The grave had been deepened approximately 2 weeks after the initial burial, according to soil stratification and leaf decay patterns preserved in layers. Keller had been working out of town on a documented construction job during that period, clocked in daily with signed timesheets. If the forensic timeline was accurate, someone else had reopened that grave. The possibility electrified the investigation. Detectives re-examined every associate Keller had in 1992, friends, co-workers, neighbors who might have known, who might have been told. They reviewed traffic citations placing vehicles near Miller's Field in the weeks following Emily's disappearance. A name resurfaced from the original file. Mark Delaney, a hunting buddy of Keller's, briefly questioned in 1992, but cleared after providing an alibi corroborated by his brother. Delaney still lived in Maple Hollow. When detectives knocked on his door, he appeared startled but composed. He denied any knowledge of the burial, denied assisting Keller in anything beyond routine hunting trips. Yet his truck, a faded green model from the early 90s, had been ticketed for illegal parking near Miller's Field 10 days after Emily vanished. The citation had been minor, forgotten. Now it glowed with renewed significance. Under questioning, Delaney admitted Keller had seemed off that month, withdrawn, drinking more heavily. He recalled one late-night drive out toward the field, Keller insisting he needed to check something. Delaney claimed he refused to get out of the truck. Claimed he waited while Keller disappeared into the trees with a flashlight and what looked like a shovel. The timeline tightened further. If Delaney was telling the truth, Keller had returned at least once beyond his admitted visits. If Delaney was lying, then the conspiracy deepened. Detectives requested soil samples from Delaney's old boots stored in his garage, a long shot after 3 decades, but worth the attempt. Every particle mattered now. The town fractured into camps, those convinced Keller had acted alone, and those whispering about accomplices, about secrets shared over beers in garages and sealed with mutual fear. The phrase cold case no longer implied stagnation. It suggested layers, sedimented lies compacted over time. In his cell, Keller reportedly asked a guard whether the grave had been disturbed much. The wording was peculiar. Disturbed much. As if he expected alteration. As if he knew more than he had revealed. And so the narrative that had begun with a confession did not settle into resolution but expanded outward, exposing fault lines beneath Maple Hollow's quiet surface. Emily Harper had been found. An arrest had shocked the community. Yet the woods beyond Miller's Field still held unanswered questions in their damp soil, and the truth, once buried shallow and then deeper, was rising piece by fractured piece, demanding to be faced in its entirety. The second grave was not a rumor, not speculation, but a measurable fact pressed into layers of soil that did not lie, and when the forensic team mapped the stratification in precise cross-sections, documenting leaf decay, insect activity, and compression depth, they confirmed what had been tightening in Detective Alvarez's chest for days. The burial site had been reopened approximately 12 to 16 days after the initial concealment, long enough for the first layer to settle, long enough for guilt, or fear, to mature into calculation. Thomas Keller had admitted to returning the night after the killing. He had even conceded to checking the grave once more, a few days later. But his work records placed him out of town 13 days after October 14th, clocked into a renovation project nearly 80 miles away. Time card signed. Payroll verified. Multiple witnesses confirming his presence. If the soil was accurate, and soil rarely improvises, then someone else had been there. The question hit Maple Hollow like a second shockwave. Was this cold case ever just one man's secret? Detectives brought Keller back into interview room 2, this time with the stratification charts laid out in front of him, glossy photographs marked with arrows and dates. Alvarez did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply pointed to the line where compacted soil gave way to fresh disruption. Explain this. Keller stared at the image longer than he had at the skull fracture. His lips parted, then pressed thin. I told you, he said slowly. I went back. Not on that date, Alvarez replied. You were working in Brookhaven. A flicker. A hesitation too brief for an untrained eye, but unmistakable to those who watched interrogations for a living. I could have left early one day, he offered. Drove back. But fuel receipts contradicted him. His truck had been serviced in Brookhaven during that window. The mileage logged was consistent with staying local to that job site. The more he tried to stretch the timeline, the more it snapped. Outside the room, investigators began pulling phone records again, this time not just Keller's, but Mark Delaney's. In 1992, Delaney had owned a pager and occasionally used payphones near Route 17. Billing archives were incomplete, but one fragment showed a collect call placed from Maple Hollow to Delaney's cousin in Albany the same week the grave was likely reopened. The duration, 30 seconds. The note in the margin, urgent. When questioned again, Delaney maintained his distance from the burial. He admitted driving Keller out to Miller's Field once, but insisted he never left the truck. He denied returning alone. Denied touching a shovel. Yet when pressed about the citation placing his vehicle near the field on October 26, his explanation faltered. He claimed he had been scouting deer trails. Hunting season did not open until November. The inconsistencies began stacking like kindling. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the rope fibers yielded a partial match to a brand commonly sold at the hardware store where Keller had been a frequent customer. That alone proved little. The rope was widely available. But embedded within the fibers were microscopic traces of red automotive paint not consistent with Keller's dark blue pickup. Delaney's truck, archived photos revealed, had once been repainted a dull red before being sold years later. Coincidence layered upon coincidence until coincidence began to look like pattern. Ruth Harper was informed carefully, gently, that investigators were exploring the possibility of additional involvement. She listened without interruption. When they finished, she asked only one question. Was she still alive when they buried her deeper? The medical examiner reiterated the uncertainty. The cranial trauma could have been fatal. The soil in the airway suggested breathing during burial. The timeline between those events remained impossible to measure with precision after 3 decades. Ruth closed her eyes, absorbing a horror that had no statute of limitations. As pressure mounted, Keller's composure thinned further. In a late-night session, long after his attorney had stepped out briefly, he whispered something almost inaudible. He said it wasn't deep enough. Alvarez leaned in. Who said that, Thomas? Keller's jaw tightened, eyes darting toward the door. Silence reclaimed the room. The next morning, Delaney requested legal counsel. The town's narrative shifted again. What had begun as a solitary monster story now felt like a shared secret, 2 men bound by a night that refused to stay buried. Neighbors replayed decades of barbecues where Keller and Delaney stood shoulder to shoulder, beers in hand, laughing too loudly. Church picnic photographs resurfaced showing them in the background, casual, unremarkable. Hidden in plain sight had become a chilling refrain. Search warrants were executed on Delaney's property. In a detached shed, investigators found an old hunting jacket sealed in a plastic bin. In one pocket, a fragment of blue and yellow rope. In another, a rusted folding knife. The blade bore no visible blood after all these years, but trace testing would be attempted. Every item was catalogued, every speck of dust treated as potential testimony. Under renewed interrogation, Delaney's story began to erode. He admitted Keller had called him the night of October 14th, voice frantic, saying he messed up bad. He admitted driving out to Miller's Field days later because Keller begged for help. At first he claimed he stayed near the road. Then he conceded he walked into the tree line. Then, after hours of incremental admissions, he acknowledged seeing the shallow grave. I told him it wouldn't hold, Delaney muttered, staring at his hands. Animals would get to it. So you helped him, Alvarez said. I didn't touch her, Delaney snapped too quickly. I dug. There it was. The second layer of soil given a voice. He described the ground as damp, harder to cut than expected. He said he never looked directly at the body. He said he just shoveled. He said he wanted it over with. When asked why he hadn't gone to police, his answer was simple and devastating. Because then I'd be in it too. Accessory, after the fact. Tampering with evidence. Conspiracy. The charges assembled themselves methodically, each one a response to choices made in darkness decades earlier. Yet even with Delaney's admission, one detail refused to settle. The soil in Emily's airway suggested breathing at the time of burial, but neither man admitted awareness of life. Keller insisted she was motionless. Delaney claimed he never checked. If she had been alive, even faintly, then the second burial was not merely concealment. It was something far worse. Forensic pathologists debated possibilities. Could residual air have drawn soil post-mortem? Could animal activity account for the pattern? The margin of uncertainty remained razor-thin and excruciating. In court, preliminary hearings drew packed galleries. Maple Hollow residents sat shoulder to shoulder, absorbing testimony that reframed their past. Prosecutors laid out a timeline of violence, panic, collusion, and calculated silence. Defense attorneys argued memory degradation, coercion, the unreliability of 30-year-old recollections. But the Bones did not forget. As winter approached, Miller's Field stood stripped of secrecy, its tree line marked by disturbed earth and faded tape. The town drove past more slowly now. Parents tightened their grip on their children's hands. The phrase "cold case" no longer felt like an abstract headline. It felt like a wound that had festered quietly beneath daily life. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when Maple Hollow lay still beneath a brittle sky, one truth echoed louder than any confession. It had taken 30 years for the grave to open, but the choices made in October 1992 had never stopped breathing beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when silence would finally give way to reckoning. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to rooms where verdicts settle like dust, and as Thomas Keller and Mark Delaney were led in for their joint preliminary hearing, Maple Hollow watched not as neighbors, but as witnesses to something that had been rotting beneath their feet since 1992. The benches were full long before the gavel struck. Some came for closure. Some came for answers. Some came because they could not reconcile the men in handcuffs with the men who once borrowed lawnmowers and grilled hamburgers at block parties. The prosecutor stood with a stack of exhibits thick enough to suggest inevitability. Photographs of the excavation, diagrams of soil displacement, enlarged images of the skull fracture with annotated impact lines, phone logs, employment records. The hardware store receipt from October 13, 1992, blue and yellow utility rope, 1 coil, purchased in cash. The clerk, now gray-haired and slower in speech, testified that Keller had joked about finally fixing that loose tarp. The tarp had never existed. Keller sat motionless, eyes forward, jaw set in a line that looked less like defiance and more like resignation. Delaney shifted beside him, fingers twitching as though still gripping a shovel handle that refused to leave his muscle memory. The state laid out its theory cleanly, clinically. Keller encountered Emily Harper near Miller's Field, initiated unwanted contact, escalated to violence when she resisted. The blunt force trauma was not incidental but sustained. He bound her wrists with rope from his truck. Whether she was unconscious or barely breathing, he dragged her into the tree line and concealed her in a shallow grave. Days later, fearing discovery, he enlisted Delaney to deepen the burial. Together, they chose silence over humanity. Together, they allowed a family to suffer 3 decades of not knowing. Defense attorneys countered with erosion of memory, of evidence, of certainty. They emphasized the absence of DNA conclusively tying Delaney to the grave. They questioned the soil timeline, suggesting environmental variables could distort decomposition layers. They leaned heavily on the passage of time, as if time itself were a reasonable doubt. But outside the courtroom, time felt like an accomplice, not an excuse. Ruth Harper attended every session, seated in the front row, hands folded in her lap. She did not look at Keller. She did not look at Delaney. Her gaze remained fixed on the witness stand, absorbing each word as if assembling the final portrait of her daughter's last moments. When the medical examiner testified about soil in the airway, about the possibility, never certainty, always couched in cautious language, that Emily may have inhaled earth, a sound escaped Ruth's throat that silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. The judge called for order. Proceedings resumed. But the damage lingered. As the weeks progressed, investigators continued refining forensic details. The rusted shovel head recovered from Keller's former crawl space was analyzed for trace minerals. Its soil composition matched the lower stratum of the grave with striking consistency, rare clay content, specific organic breakdown unique to that creek bend. It was not absolute proof of use in the burial, but it narrowed coincidence to a near-impossible margin. Delaney's hunting jacket yielded microscopic plant matter consistent with vegetation native to Miller's Field, embedded deep within seam stitching. 30 years had not erased everything. Under mounting evidence, Delaney's defense strategy shifted. He admitted to digging. He admitted to helping deepen the grave. But he maintained he believed Emily was already dead. He portrayed himself as weak, manipulated by a friend's desperation, too cowardly to report what he'd seen. Accessory, yes. Murderer, no. Keller, meanwhile, retreated inward. In one closed-door session with his attorney present, he revised a final detail that sent a ripple through the prosecution's timeline. He admitted that after striking Emily, after binding her wrists, he had felt a faint movement as he lowered her into the shallow pit. "I thought it was reflex," he murmured. "I told myself it was reflex." He did not check for pulse. He did not untie the rope. He shoveled. The admission did not clarify whether she was alive. It clarified something else: choice. Maple Hollow grappled with the weight of that word. Choice. Not accident. Not panic alone. A sequence of decisions layered one atop another until silence became habit. Media attention intensified as the narrative evolved from a single confession to a dual reckoning. Headlines no longer asked if the cold case had been solved. They debated the degree of guilt. Commentators dissected legal definitions: depraved indifference, intent, accessory liability. But in living rooms across town, the legal language felt secondary to a simpler horror. Two men had known where Emily was, had stood above her grave, and had said nothing while her parents searched woods and rivers for decades. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial for both defendants. Keller would face second-degree murder charges. Delaney would face charges of tampering with evidence and accessory after the fact, with the possibility of escalation depending on jury findings regarding knowledge of life at burial. As winter deepened, the field where Emily had lain became a quiet memorial site. Flowers appeared along the tree line. A wooden cross stood at the approximate location of the grave, not as a spectacle, but as a marker of endurance. Snow fell lightly one evening, covering the disturbed earth in a clean, white sheet that looked almost peaceful, almost merciful. Inside her home, Ruth Harper finally allowed herself to take down the faded missing person flyers she had kept in a drawer for 30 years. She did not discard them. She placed them carefully in a box labeled simply Emily. Closure was not a door slamming shut. It was a slow exhale after decades of holding breath. Yet, even as legal machinery advanced toward trial, one question continued to echo in quiet conversations and sleepless nights. Had Emily Harper taken her final breath alone in that shallow grave, or had there been a moment, brief, desperate, when rescue was still possible? The answer might never be precise enough to soothe. Science could approximate. Testimony could imply. But certainty, like innocence, had long ago been buried and disturbed too many times to remain intact. And so Maple Hollow moved forward not with relief, but with a heavy awareness that justice, even when delayed, does not erase what was done in darkness. It illuminates it. It forces a community to look directly at the place where trust once stood and to accept that the quietest streets can hide the loudest secrets, waiting patiently for the day when a single confession at 2:17 in the morning breaks everything open. The trial began on a gray morning that felt suspended between seasons, the sky low and metallic over Maple Hollow as if the town itself were bracing for impact, and inside the courthouse the air carried that unmistakable tension of something irreversible about to unfold. Because this was no longer about reopening a cold case or parsing confessions in sterile interview rooms. This was about 12 jurors deciding how history would remember what happened in the woods beyond Miller's Field in October 1992. Thomas Keller entered first, suit hanging loosely on a frame that had thinned under months of incarceration, his expression drained of the fragile control he once tried to maintain. Mark Delaney followed, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched, a man who had lived 30 years under the illusion that silence was protection, now confronting the reality that silence had only delayed consequence. Opening statements cut through the room with surgical precision. The prosecutor did not dramatize. The facts were heavy enough. He spoke of a 17-year-old girl walking to her car after a diner shift, of a pickup idling in the dark, of rope purchased the day before, of a skull fractured not once, but with measurable force. He spoke of a shallow grave dug in panic and deepened in calculation. He spoke of soil in an airway. He ended with a phrase that seemed to settle over the jury like ash. This was not disappearance. This was a choice. The defense countered with erosion again. Memory fades, evidence degrades, forensic interpretation evolves. Keller's attorney leaned into the language of accident and fear, framing his client as a reckless young man overwhelmed by a situation spiraling beyond his control. Delaney's attorney positioned his client as morally weak but not murderous, a bystander to horror who made the catastrophic mistake of loyalty over law. But then the witnesses began. The forensic anthropologist took the stand and projected enlarged images of the skull fracture onto a screen that seemed too bright for such darkness. She described the radiating lines consistent with at least 2 separate impacts. She demonstrated angles using a model skull, her tone calm, methodical, devastating. On cross-examination, she conceded that exact sequencing of blows could not be definitively established after 30 years. But she did not retreat from the conclusion. The injuries were consistent with deliberate force. Next came the soil stratification expert. Layer by layer, he explained compaction rates, leaf decay patterns, insect colonization timelines. He described the first burial as hurried, shallow, uneven. The second as deeper, more structured, executed days later. When asked whether environmental variables could account for the layered disturbance without human intervention, he answered simply, not to this degree. Ruth Harper sat motionless as the rope fibers were introduced into evidence, displayed magnified thousands of times, their synthetic strands unmistakable. The hardware store clerk identified Keller as the purchaser. The former girlfriend recounted the 9:42 p.m. call. I messed up. Something bad happened. Her voice trembling not with drama, but with the weight of realizing she had once held a fragment of truth and let it slip away. Then came the testimony that shifted the room's oxygen. Mark Delaney took the stand in his own defense. He spoke slowly at first, eyes fixed somewhere just above the jury's heads. He admitted to driving Keller to Miller's Field days after Emily vanished. Admitted to seeing the disturbed earth. Admitted to digging. He insisted he believed she was dead. He insisted he never saw movement, never heard breath. I told him it wouldn't hold, he said again, echoing the phrase that had surfaced during interrogation. Animals would get to it. The prosecutor approached carefully. When you dug deeper, did you see her face? Delaney hesitated.
No.
Did you see her chest? Another pause. I tried not to look. Tried not to look. The phrase struck like a hammer. Not didn't see. Tried not to look. The prosecutor pressed. Is it possible she was alive? Delaney swallowed hard. I don't know. It was not denial. It was not certainty. It was a crack. When Keller took the stand days later, the courtroom felt coiled tight. He avoided Ruth's gaze. He spoke of that night with a rehearsed fragility, describing panic, fear, alcohol, youth. He admitted striking Emily, but insisted he never intended to kill. He described binding her wrists as instinct, as though restraint were reflexive. He claimed that when he lowered her into the grave, she was limp, unresponsive. He claimed he believed she was gone. The prosecutor asked one question that cut through every layer of narrative. Did you check? Silence. Did you check for a pulse, Thomas? A longer silence, thick enough to hear breathing in the gallery. No, he whispered. In that single syllable, decades collapsed. Closing arguments arrived like final breaths before submersion. The state framed the case not around intent alone, but around indifference, around the conscious decision to bury rather than help, to deepen rather than confess, to live alongside a grieving family, without ever stepping forward. The defense pleaded for nuance, for the possibility that panic and immaturity had escalated tragedy beyond foresight. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Maple Hollow moved in slow motion during that time. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Cars idled longer at intersections. The field beyond the tree line stood quiet under a pale winter sun, as if the land itself awaited judgment. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom filled before the doors officially opened. Keller was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jurors concluded that even without premeditated intent, his actions demonstrated a depraved indifference to human life. Delaney was found guilty of accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence. The jury stopped short of elevating his charge to murder, citing reasonable doubt about knowledge of life at burial. Ruth Harper did not react immediately. She sat still as the words echoed. Only when Keller was led away in handcuffs did she exhale, a sound that carried 30 years of waiting. Sentencing weeks later brought finality of a legal kind. Keller received a term that would likely keep him incarcerated for the remainder of his life. Delaney received years that felt insufficient to some and merciful to others. Justice, like grief, does not distribute itself evenly. And yet, as the town slowly resumed its rhythms, school buses running, church bells ringing, the diner reopening under new management, an undercurrent remained. The case had been solved. The confession had shattered silence. The trial had assigned guilt. But the image lingered, a shallow grave in cold October soil, a decision made in darkness not to check for breath, not to choose rescue. Maple Hollow would carry that knowledge forward, woven into its sidewalks and storefronts, a reminder that even in the quietest towns, even under the most ordinary skies, a single moment of violence can echo for generations. Waiting patiently for the night when someone finally walks into a sheriff's office at 2:17 in the morning and says the words that break everything open. Sentencing did not end it. The gavel fell, the courtroom emptied, the headlines shifted from verdict reached to justice served, but in Maple Hollow justice felt less like triumph and more like excavation, as if the town had dug up not only a grave but a version of itself it no longer recognized. And in the weeks after Thomas Keller was transferred to state prison, something unexpected happened. He asked to speak again. Not to the press. Not to the parole board. To Detective Alvarez. The request came through his attorney, framed as a clarification, a desire to set the record straight. Alvarez hesitated. Trials close chapters. They do not usually reopen them. But something in the phrasing unsettled her. Set the record straight. Records imply omissions. She drove to the correctional facility on a windswept afternoon, the sky sharp and colorless, the kind of day that strips warmth from everything it touches. Keller was thinner now, posture bent, eyes hollowed by routine and consequence. They sat across from each other in a visitation room where conversations echo faintly off reinforced glass. I didn't tell you everything, he began, voice low, almost swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights. Alvarez said nothing. He described the night again, but this time he lingered on a detail he had previously skimmed past, the moment after he struck Emily when she lay still beside the car. He said he had knelt close enough to feel her breath against his wrist. Not strong, not steady, but there. He said it terrified him more than if she had been motionless. If she was breathing, he whispered, then I wasn't just in trouble. I was finished. So he bound her wrists tighter, so she wouldn't fight if she woke up. The admission did not alter the conviction. It altered something deeper. He went on to describe lowering her into the shallow pit, the soil loose and uneven beneath her. He said that as he began to shovel, he heard a sound. Not words. Not a scream. A movement. Like air catching, he said. Like someone trying to clear their throat. Alvarez felt the room narrow. Why didn't you stop? She asked quietly. Keller's answer came without hesitation. Because if I stopped, I'd have to fix it. And I didn't know how to fix it. Fix it. As if life were a mechanical failure. He insisted Delaney never saw movement. Insisted he never told him about the breath, the sound. Delaney had arrived days later when, according to Keller, Emily was already gone. He claimed the second burial was purely concealment, not completion. Whether that distinction mattered after 3 decades was another question. Alvarez left the prison with a statement recorded and sealed. The law had already spoken, but the truth, raw, unfiltered, had shifted the emotional landscape of the case once more. Soil in the airway was no longer abstract possibility. It had context. When Ruth Harper was informed of the supplemental statement, she did not collapse. She did not rage. She asked to hear the recording. In a private room at the sheriff's office, she listened to Keller's voice describe breath, movement, a sound like air catching in the throat. She closed her eyes, absorbing each word as if it were physical weight pressing against her chest. When it ended, she removed the headphones slowly. She tried, Ruth said. Not as accusation. Not as question. As fact. The town learned the new admission through a controlled press release. Media reignited briefly. Convicted killer revises confession. New details emerge in 1992 cold case. But for Maple Hollow, the story was no longer spectacle. It was intimate. It lived in kitchens and living rooms, in quiet conversations after dinner. Some residents expressed renewed anger, arguing the prosecution should have pursued first-degree charges if that detail had surfaced earlier. Others believed nothing could alter the outcome now. The legal chapter was closed. The moral reckoning was ongoing. Mark Delaney, through his attorney, denied knowledge of any breath, any movement. He maintained that when he helped deepen the grave, he believed without question that Emily was deceased. Whether he truly did or simply convinced himself over time was something only he would ever know. Winter gave way slowly to spring. Snow receded from Miller's Field, revealing grass flattened where search tents had once stood. The wooden cross remained. Someone replaced wilted flowers with fresh ones each week. No one claimed responsibility. It simply happened. A community forum was organized at the high school auditorium. Lessons from a cold case, the banner read. Law enforcement spoke about advancements in forensic science, about the importance of revisiting dormant files. Alvarez addressed the crowd with steady clarity. Cases don't expire, she said. They wait. Ruth Harper was invited to speak last. She approached the podium without notes. Her voice carried not with theatrical strength, but with endurance. She spoke about time, how it stretches when you are waiting for a child to come home. She spoke about hope, how it mutates but never fully dies. And then she said something that settled into the room like a final chord. Truth doesn't always come when you need it, she said. Sometimes it comes when it's ready. And when it does, you have to be strong enough to hold it. Maple Hollow listened in silence. Keller would spend the rest of his life within concrete walls. Delaney would eventually step back into a world that no longer looked at him the same way. The field would grow green again. Children would run across it unaware of what lay beneath decades earlier. But the town would remember. Because long after the cameras leave and the court transcripts are archived, what remains is the echo of a decision made in darkness. The choice not to check for a pulse, not to loosen rope, not to lift soil from a mouth that might still have been drawing breath. The cold case had been solved. The confession had rocked the town. The verdict had been delivered. But the true aftermath was quieter, deeper, etched into Maple Hollow's collective memory like layers of earth disturbed and resettled, a reminder that even when silence lasts 30 years, it is never truly empty. It waits. And one night, under harsh fluorescent light at 2:17 in the morning, it finally speaks. Spring did not ask permission to arrive. It came the way it always had in Maple Hollow, pushing green through thawed soil, softening the edges of winter, daring the town to move forward even when part of it wanted to stay frozen in that courtroom moment when guilt was spoken aloud. Miller's Field bloomed again, grass thick and bright over ground that had once hidden a secret so heavy it bent 3 decades of time around it. But peace did not return in a clean line. It arrived fractured. Thomas Keller's revised statement, about breath, about the sound in Emily's throat, spread quietly through the town long after the media cycle moved on. It changed the texture of grief. Before, there had been uncertainty, the haunting possibility that she suffered. Now there was a description. Specific. Human. Terrible. In prison, Keller began writing letters. Not to the press. Not to advocacy groups. To Ruth Harper. The first one was returned unopened. The second sat on her kitchen table for days before she touched it. Cream-colored envelope. State Correctional Facility stamped in the corner. handwriting she had once seen on neighborhood sign-up sheets for block parties. She did not open it alone. She brought it to the sheriff's office and asked Detective Alvarez to read it first. Inside, Keller did not ask for forgiveness. He wrote about memory, about the way that night replayed in fragments. He described headlights in the distance that may or may not have existed. He described the weight of the shovel. He described convincing himself that movement was reflex, that breath was imagination. He wrote, "I told myself if I finished quickly, it would already be over." The sentence sat like a stone in the center of the page. He ended the letter with a line that felt less like apology and more like confession distilled. "I chose the ground over her." Ruth eventually read it. She did not cry. She folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She would not respond. Meanwhile, Mark Delaney filed an appeal. His legal team argued ineffective counsel, argued that emotional prejudice in a small town influenced the jury, argued that the soil timeline remained interpretive, not absolute. The motion stirred old tensions. Some residents saw it as procedural. Others saw it as refusal to accept responsibility. At a local diner, new paint, same layout. Conversations turned sharp again. Was Delaney just a coward who got caught in someone else's crime? Or had he buried more than earth that night? The distinction mattered legally. It mattered morally. It mattered less to a mother who had lost a daughter either way. Detective Alvarez found herself revisiting the case file late at night, not because the law required it, but because unresolved details have a way of tugging at investigators long after court dates pass. She replayed Delaney's testimony in her mind. Tried not to look. The phrase lingered. It implied proximity. It implied awareness, even if he had shielded his eyes. Forensic technology had already done most of what it could. After 30 years, the evidence had limits. But Alvarez re-examined one overlooked detail. The positioning of Emily's remains relative to the second burial. The orientation had shifted slightly from the first layer to the second. That meant movement, either from decomposition, animal activity, or hands. Delaney had insisted he never touched her. But soil patterns indicated repositioning consistent with being rolled slightly to one side before deeper coverage. It could have been incidental. It could have been intentional. The line between those two possibilities was thin and jagged. Summer approached. The anniversary of October 14th loomed ahead like a date carved into stone. For the first time in 30 years, Maple Hollow would mark it not as a disappearance, but as a known death. The town council voted to place a permanent memorial near Miller's Field. Not directly over the grave site. Ruth did not want it turned into spectacle, but at the entrance to the trail leading toward the creek. A simple plaque. Her name. Her dates. A line chosen by her mother. She was here. She mattered. The dedication ceremony drew more people than expected. Not out of curiosity. Out of acknowledgement. Teenagers who had grown up hearing the story stood beside elders who remembered the search parties. Teachers, shop owners, deputies, church volunteers. The field no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a scar, visible, permanent, but no longer bleeding. Ruth spoke briefly. She thanked the investigators again. She thanked the jurors. She did not mention Keller. She did not mention Delaney. Instead, she described Emily's laugh. The way she used to hum while washing dishes. The way she once insisted on adopting a stray cat and named it Midnight because every dark thing deserves a softer name. The crowd smiled through tears. Because beyond crime scene photos and courtroom transcripts, there had been a girl. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the crowd thinned, Ruth remained by the plaque alone. The air was warm, cicadas buzzing in distant trees. Detective Alvarez approached quietly, but did not interrupt. After a long silence, Ruth spoke without turning. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Alvarez waited. If he had stopped. Her voice was steady, not fragile. If he had just stopped. The simplicity of it was devastating. Not if he had never approached her. Not if he had never struck her. If he had stopped. After the breath. After the sound. The law had measured intent and consequence. But grief measures moments. Months later, Delaney's appeal was denied. The court ruled that the evidence, while circumstantial in parts, was sufficient and that procedural conduct during trial met standards. His conviction stood. Keller continued to send letters. None were opened. Eventually they stopped. Maple Hollow did not forget. It adjusted. The high school added a scholarship in Emily's name for students pursuing criminal justice or forensic science. Cold case seminars referenced her file as an example of why evidence preservation matters, why small details, rope fibers, soil layers, forgotten phone calls, can outlast silence. And sometimes, late at night, when the town was quiet and the wind brushed against the trees near Miller's Field, there remained a memory not of headlines or verdicts, but of a single decision in the dark, a man hearing breath and choosing soil instead. The cold case had ended in court. The confession had shaken the community. The grave had been found, the truth extracted layer by layer. But what lingered was something quieter and far more enduring, the understanding that justice can arrive decades late and still not answer the simplest question that echoes in every human heart. Why didn't he stop? Autumn returned the way it always had, slowly, almost politely, brushing the trees around Miller's Field with gold and rust, pretending that time moved in gentle circles instead of jagged lines. 31 years after Emily Harper vanished, Maple Hollow had learned to live with the verdict. The word closure appeared in newspaper retrospectives, in documentary segments, in anniversary podcasts that revisited the New York 1992 cold case breakthrough. But closure, in this town, was a word people said out loud and questioned in private. Because confessions don't always quiet the noise. Sometimes they amplify it. Thomas Keller's final interview from prison aired on a regional true crime program in late September. He had agreed to speak on one condition, that no one call him misunderstood. He did not want sympathy. He wanted to correct the record. The phrasing alone was enough to set the town on edge. The camera captured him in harsh fluorescent light, older now, thinner, his hair almost entirely gray. His hands trembled, not dramatically, not theatrically, but subtly, like a machine running on failing current. When asked why he had spoken after 30 years, he said something that unsettled even the seasoned journalist across from him. Because silence was starting to feel like a second burial. The segment replayed the familiar details, the night of October 14th, the argument, the strike, the panic, the shovel. But then Keller introduced something new. A detail not mentioned in trial testimony, not written in his letters, not documented in any official report. He said there had been a car. Not headlights imagined in panic. Not distant traffic on Route 17. A car parked on the far edge of Miller's Field, engine off, lights dark. He claimed he saw the silhouette of someone inside when he first pulled up. He assumed it was a couple. Teenagers, maybe. He did not approach. He did not investigate. He told himself it had nothing to do with him. The interviewer pressed him. Why hadn't this come up before? Keller stared at the table before answering. Because I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be real. The statement detonated in Maple Hollow like a delayed charge. Within hours, social media threads lit up. Old rumors resurfaced. In 1992, Miller's Field had been a quiet stretch known to local teens as a place to escape watchful parents. Had someone else been there that night? Had someone seen something and stayed silent? Or was this a final attempt by a convicted man to fracture the narrative one more time? Detective Alvarez watched the segment alone in her living room. She did not react immediately. She rewound the part about the car 3 times. Keller's voice did not waver. His eyes did not dart. If he was lying, he was calm about it. The next morning, she reopened the archived tip logs from October 1992. Paper records, scanned and digitized years later. She searched for mentions of vehicles near Miller's Field that evening. Most were noise, farm trucks, residents driving home, routine traffic. But one entry caught her eye. A handwritten note from a deputy dated October 16th, 2 days after Emily's disappearance. Caller reports blue sedan seen parked near field around 10:30 p.m. on October 14th. Occupants unknown. No plate obtained. Caller declined to leave name. The tip had gone nowhere. In a flood of calls during the early days of a missing person case, anonymous vehicle sightings were common. Without a plate number, without a description of occupants, it had been impossible to pursue. Alvarez felt something tighten in her chest. Not hope, not dread, recognition. She requested access to DMV archives for 1992 registrations of blue sedans in Maple Hollow and neighboring counties. The list was long. Hundreds of vehicles. Many long since scrapped or sold. Owners moved, died, disappeared into other states. But the reemergence of that single tip shifted the atmosphere in town. Talk radio hosts speculated wildly. Was there an accomplice never identified? A witness who feared coming forward? A bystander who saw Keller with Emily and chose silence to avoid involvement? The idea that someone else might have been present, close enough to see, close enough to intervene, reopened wounds that had only just begun to scar. Ruth Harper refused to watch the interview. She heard about the car from a neighbor who tried to present it gently, as if soft words could blunt the edge of new uncertainty. Ruth listened, nodded once, and said, "He's had 30 years to decide what story he wants to tell." But later that night, alone in her kitchen, she took out the envelope containing Keller's letter, the one she had kept despite everything, and reread the line, "I chose the ground over her." No mention of a car. No hint of another presence. Was this new detail memory surfacing? Or manipulation? Alvarez drove to the correctional facility 2 days later. Keller agreed to speak with her. No cameras. No journalists. Just a metal table, 2 chairs, and a recorder. "You said there was a car," she began, her tone even. He nodded. "Why now?" He took longer to answer than he had on television. "Because I keep seeing it when I close my eyes. It's been there the whole time." "Why didn't you mention it during trial?" "Because I didn't want it to matter." The phrasing again. Not "I forgot." Not "I was afraid." "I didn't want it to matter." "Did you recognize the vehicle?" Alvarez asked.
No.
"Did you see anyone clearly?" "A shape. Driver's seat. Maybe a second person. I don't know." "Did they see you?" His jaw tightened. "I think so." The implication hung between them. If someone had seen Keller and Emily in that field, if someone had witnessed even a fragment of what happened, and had stayed silent for 3 decades, what did that silence mean? Fear? Complicity? Indifference? Alvarez left the facility with more questions than answers. Back in Maple Hollow, the rumor mill accelerated. Names surfaced. Former students, known troublemakers, couples who had dated in high school. Old yearbooks were pulled from attics. People did mental math about who owned what car in 1992. The town felt smaller than ever, as if the field's darkness had stretched invisible threads into every driveway. Then, unexpectedly, a call came in. A woman in her late 40s, voice tight but steady. She had been 17 in 1992. She and her boyfriend had parked at Miller's Field the night Emily disappeared. They had left around 10:15 p.m., she said. They saw a pickup truck enter as they pulled out. She remembered it because it drove too fast over uneven ground, headlights bouncing. She had told no one at the time because, in her words, "We weren't supposed to be there." Alvarez felt the air shift. The woman described the truck as dark-colored, possibly green or black. Older model. She couldn't recall the license plate. Her boyfriend, now an ex-husband living in another state, might remember more. Records showed Keller drove a dark green Ford pickup in 1992. The timeline aligned uncomfortably well. But this new witness introduced a complication. If she and her boyfriend left at 10:15 p.m. and Keller arrived shortly after, who was in the blue sedan reported at 10:30 p.m., had the anonymous caller misjudged the time? Or had there been more than one vehicle that night? The investigation, thought closed, began to pulse again. For Ruth, the revival was exhausting. Each new detail felt like another layer of earth being turned over, releasing old air she had finally stopped breathing. "I don't need more ghosts," she told Alvarez quietly when informed about the witness. "I just need the truth to stay still." But truth rarely stays still. It shifts as memory shifts. It reorders itself around new light. As October approached again, Maple Hollow prepared for another anniversary vigil. This time, the mood was different. Not raw grief. Not courtroom tension. Something more complicated, a mixture of resolution and renewed uncertainty. Candles lined the path near the memorial plaque. Faces illuminated in flickering light. Names whispered. Stories shared. And beneath it all, a question resurfacing with fresh urgency. If someone else had been there, close enough to see a truck, close enough to witness a shape in a field, what responsibility had they carried for 31 years? Keller's confession had rocked the town. The discovery of the grave had rewritten its history. But now, the possibility of another silent presence hovered over Maple Hollow like a shadow just beyond the reach of flame. The field remained quiet, grass bending in the cool night breeze, giving no indication of what it had seen, what it had held, what secrets might still linger beneath its roots. And as the candles burned low, one thought threaded through the gathered crowd, unspoken but shared. What if someone had watched and done nothing? The call came 3 nights after the vigil, just past midnight, when Maple Hollow had finally settled into that fragile silence that follows public grief. Detective Alvarez was still awake, files spread across her dining room table, the old blue sedan tip-printed beside the newly recorded witness statement. Her phone vibrated once. Unknown number. Local exchange. She answered without greeting. A man's voice, low, strained, older than she expected. "I saw it," he said. No preamble. No hesitation. "I saw more than I ever told anyone." Alvarez didn't move. Start at the beginning. There was a long exhale on the other end, the kind that carries 3 decades of weight. He gave his name, Daniel Mercer, 17 in 1992, owner of a blue 1988 Chevrolet Cavalier. The words landed with a dull, unmistakable force. "I was parked at Miller's Field that night," he said. Alone. Not a couple. Not a hidden rendezvous. Alone. He told her he used to go there when he couldn't sleep. To sit. To think. To listen to the engine tick as it cooled. October air sharp in his lungs. Radio low. Headlights off. He remembered the time because he'd checked his watch when a truck's headlights flared in his rearview mirror. 10:28 p.m. He watched the pickup roll across the uneven grass. Dark. Maybe green. He didn't recognize the driver at first. Just a silhouette behind glass. Then he saw a second figure in the passenger seat. A woman. Head tilted forward. The field, which had lived for 31 years as a static crime scene in the town's memory, suddenly felt alive again, moving, breathing, replaying itself. Mercer said he stayed in his car. He told himself it wasn't his business. People argued in parked vehicles all the time. Couples fought. Voices carried, distorted by wind and distance. He heard something that might have been shouting or laughter. He couldn't tell. He didn't want to tell. "I should have left," he said into the phone. "But I didn't." He described watching Keller exit the truck, watching him circle to the passenger side, watching him pull someone out. Alvarez's hand tightened around the phone. "Was she moving?" she asked. A pause. Longer than any before it. "Yes." The word landed like a verdict of its own. He said he saw Keller lower her to the ground. He saw a struggle, brief, disjointed, like shadows colliding. He saw Keller raise something heavy. He heard a sound he would later try to convince himself was a door slamming. "I knew it wasn't," Mercer whispered. "I knew." He said he froze. He told himself it was a fight between 2 adults. He told himself if it was serious, someone else would call the police. He told himself a dozen lies in less than a minute. Then he watched Keller drag the body toward the darker edge of the field. "I didn't get out of the car," Mercer said. "I didn't honk. I didn't shout. I just watched." Alvarez closed her eyes briefly, not in disbelief, but in grim recognition. This was the shadow that had hovered over the case since Keller mentioned the car. Not an accomplice. Not a conspirator. A witness. "Why didn't you come forward in 1992? She asked. His answer came fractured. "Fear." Being 17. Being at a place he wasn't supposed to be. Worry his parents would find out. Worry he'd be dragged into court. Worry he'd misinterpreted what he saw. And when she was reported missing? Alvarez pressed. I told myself it couldn't be the same girl. And when they found her? Silence. I told myself it was too late. Too late. The phrase echoed with cruel symmetry. Over the next hour, Mercer filled in details he had buried for 3 decades. He described the way Keller moved. Hurried, erratic. He described the shovel glinting briefly in the truck bed. He described headlights flashing once as Keller repositioned the vehicle closer to the tree line. He said he left before the digging was finished. He couldn't bear to watch anymore. He drove home, hands shaking so badly he had to pull over twice. He washed his car the next morning for no reason he could articulate. He avoided Miller's Field for years. I thought about calling, he said. Every time there was a news update. Every time her picture was on TV. I picked up the phone once. Dialed half the number. Then I hung up. Alvarez listened without interruption. When he finished, the silence between them was no longer empty. It was saturated. You understand, she said carefully, that what you're telling me means she may have been alive when you saw her. I know, he replied, voice breaking for the first time. I've known that for 31 years. The next morning, Maple Hollow woke to another headline. New witness emerges in 1992 cold case. Man admits watching attack. Shock rippled outward, sharper than the confession had been. Keller was a monster in the narrative. Easy to isolate. Easy to condemn. Mercer was something more unsettling. Ordinary. He had lived in town for years after the crime. Attended reunions. Shopped at the same grocery store as Ruth Harper. Stood in line at the post office. Carried the memory quietly, invisibly. The community reaction fractured along painful lines. Some demanded charges, obstruction, failure to report, anything that would translate moral failure into legal consequence. Others argued he had been a teenager, terrified, unprepared for what he witnessed. The district attorney reviewed the statute. In 1992, there had been no general legal duty for a bystander to report a felony they witnessed, absent specific circumstances. Mercer had not assisted. He had not concealed evidence. He had simply remained silent. Legally, that silence existed in a gray void. Morally, it thundered. Ruth Harper was informed privately before the story broke. She sat across from Alvarez in the same room where she had once listened to Keller's recording. This time, there was no audio file. Just words. He saw her. Ruth said slowly. He saw my daughter. Yes. And he left. Yes. Ruth inhaled, steady but thin. If he had called 911? Alvarez did not answer immediately. She chose precision over comfort. Response time from town to the field in 1992 averaged 8 minutes at that hour. If she was still breathing when he saw her, it's possible. Possible. A word that can cradle hope or sharpen regret. Ruth closed her eyes. For a moment, Alvarez thought she might collapse. Instead, she straightened. I want to see him, Ruth said. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room at the sheriff's office. No press. No cameras. Just 3 chairs and a table. Daniel Mercer looked smaller than his voice had sounded on the phone. Shoulders curved inward. Hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. When Ruth entered, he stood instinctively, then seemed unsure what to do with the gesture. She did not sit immediately. She looked at him, not with theatrical fury, not with visible hatred, but with an intensity that made him lower his gaze. You saw her, she said. Yes. You heard her. I think so. And you left. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes. Silence pressed against the walls. Why? Ruth asked, not angrily, not even loudly, just plainly. He tried to explain fear. Youth. Panic. The way the brain fractures under shock. The excuses he'd rehearsed for decades sounded hollow in the open air. I thought someone else would do something, he said finally. Ruth's expression shifted, not into rage, but into something colder. There was no one else, she replied. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just acknowledgement. When it ended, Mercer remained seated long after Ruth had left the room. Maple Hollow absorbed the revelation with a new kind of ache. The narrative had shifted again. The cold case was no longer just about a killer and his delayed confession. It was about proximity. About the thin line between witness and participant. About the cost of silence. In the days that followed, Miller's Field felt different. Not darker. Not lighter. Just heavier, as if the air itself carried an added layer of truth. 2 vehicles. 1 truck. 1 blue sedan. 1 man digging. 1 man watching. 1 girl fighting for breath beneath an October sky. The case had been solved. The killer convicted. The confession delivered. And yet, in the quiet after the latest headline faded, Maple Hollow understood something more complicated than justice. Sometimes a crime echoes, not just through the hands that commit it, but through the eyes that see it, and close. Winter came down hard the year the truth finally stopped shifting. Snow covered Miller's Field in a clean, indifferent sheet of white, erasing tire tracks, footprints, the faint depressions where candles had once burned. From a distance, it looked untouched, almost peaceful. But Maple Hollow no longer trusted surfaces. It had learned what could lie just beneath them. Daniel Mercer was not charged. The district attorney confirmed it publicly in a statement that felt clinical against the emotional wreckage. No statutory obligation to report in 1992, no evidence of direct participation, no obstruction after the fact. Legally, he remained a citizen with a conscience. Socially, he became something else. He resigned from his job at the hardware store within a week of his identity becoming public. Not because anyone demanded it outright, but because silence followed him down every aisle. Conversations stopped when he entered. People looked not with hatred, but with a question that never quite reached their lips. Why didn't you move? Mercer gave one final statement to the press, standing alone on the courthouse steps where Keller had once been led in handcuffs. There were no flashing lights this time, no shouting reporters. Just a small cluster of cameras and a man who looked as if he had aged a decade in a month. I was 17, he said. I was afraid. That's the truth. But fear doesn't excuse silence. If I had called, maybe she would have lived. I'll never know. And not knowing is the sentence I carry. He did not cry. He did not plead. He stepped away from the microphones and disappeared into a town that no longer felt like home. Thomas Keller remained in prison, his world reduced to concrete and routine. When informed that a witness had come forward describing Emily moving, breathing, struggling, he reportedly went quiet for a long time. A corrections officer later described him sitting on his bunk, staring at the wall, unmoving. He requested no new interviews, offered no rebuttal. For the first time since his arrest, he stopped trying to refine the narrative. Mark Delaney completed his sentence for evidence tampering and returned to a life under a different sky, in a different county, where his name carried less weight. He never publicly commented on Mercer's statement. Whether he felt relief or renewed shame was known only to him. And Ruth Harper. Ruth stood at the edge of Miller's Field on the first anniversary after the witness revelation, alone except for Detective Alvarez, who remained a few steps back out of quiet respect. The snow had begun to fall again, fine and steady. Ruth held no flowers this time, no candles, just her gloves clasped together against the cold. For 31 years, she said softly, eyes on the white expanse, I wondered where she was. Then I wondered how she died. Now I wonder how long she fought. Alvarez had no words that would not fracture under their own weight. Ruth continued, voice steady despite the wind. He saw her. And he left. That will always be part of the story. But it's not the whole story. She turned slightly, looking across the field as if she could still see that October night layered over the snow, the truck's headlights, the shadow of a blue sedan, the dark edge of trees. The whole story, she said, is that she was there. She was alive. She fought. And even buried under fear, under dirt, under silence, she mattered. It was not forgiveness. It was something firmer, a reclaiming. In the months that followed, Maple Hollow did something unexpected. Instead of letting the case recede into the category of solved, the town incorporated it into its civic memory. The high school introduced an annual ethics forum for seniors titled The Bystander Question. Law enforcement spoke not only about forensic breakthroughs and cold case persistence, but about responsibility, about what it means to act when action is inconvenient, frightening, socially costly. Detective Alvarez was invited to speak at the first forum. She stood on the auditorium stage where vigils had once been held and addressed rows of students not yet born when Emily Harper disappeared. "Cold case," she began, letting the words hang. "It sounds like something frozen, distant, historical. But cases aren't cold because they're old. They're cold because something or someone stopped the heat of truth from moving." She didn't name Mercer. She didn't need to. "Sometimes that heat comes from a lab," she continued. "Sometimes from a confession. And sometimes it comes from a person deciding not to stay silent." The room was quiet in a way that felt attentive, not haunted. Outside, life in Maple Hollow resumed its familiar rhythms. Grocery carts rolled across parking lots. Children boarded school buses. Snow melted into spring runoff. The field turned green again. But the story no longer lived only in headlines like New York 1992 Cold Case Breakthrough or Surprise Confession Rocks Small Town. It lived in subtler ways, in how neighbors checked on one another, in how parents talked to their teenagers about courage, in how silence was no longer automatically treated as neutral. On the 32nd anniversary, a new plaque was placed beside the original memorial. It did not recount the crime in detail. It did not name Keller or Mercer. It bore a single inscription: "If you see something, do something. Silence has consequences." Ruth attended the small dedication ceremony. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters, then stepped back. "Do you feel closure?" a reporter asked her gently, careful not to provoke. Ruth considered the question longer than anyone expected. "I feel truth," she said finally. "And truth is heavier than closure. But it's real." As the crowd dispersed, she remained for a moment, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. For the first time in decades, the field did not feel like an open wound. It felt like ground that had been turned, exposed to light, allowed to breathe. The case would be archived, studied, cited in training seminars about delayed confessions and bystander psychology. Experts would analyze the timeline, the soil evidence, the mechanics of memory under trauma. But beneath every professional breakdown, beneath every legal conclusion, the core would remain painfully simple. A young woman trusted the wrong person. A man chose violence. Another chose silence. And a town chose, eventually, to face all of it. On a quiet evening in early spring, Detective Alvarez drove past Miller's Field one last time before transferring to a different unit. She slowed briefly, looking out over the open stretch of land that had defined so much of her career. The sky was clear, streaked with the last light of day. No police tape. No cameras. No crowd. Just wind moving through grass. Cold cases do not end with a single arrest. They unravel, thread by thread, until what remains is not just a solved crime, but a mirror held up to everyone who stood near it. In Maple Hollow, that mirror would never be taken down. And somewhere beneath the open sky, where snow once hid and headlights once flared, the silence that lasted 30 years had finally been broken, completely, irrevocably, leaving behind not peace, exactly, but something stronger. A town that would never again mistake quiet for innocence. By the time the documentaries moved on and the satellite trucks stopped circling Maple Hollow, the town understood something the outside world did not. The story had never really been about a single night in 1992. It had been about the years that followed. The waiting, the guessing, the almost knowing. Spring deepened. The trees around Miller's Field filled out, thick and green, obscuring sightlines that once stretched clear across the grass. Standing at the roadside now, You could no longer see the exact spot where the truck had idled, where a blue sedan had lingered in shadow, where a 17-year-old girl had fought for air. Nature had reclaimed the geometry of the crime. But memory does not erode so easily. Daniel Mercer left town quietly in early May. No announcement. No farewell. A rented moving truck, loaded at dawn. By noon, the driveway he'd grown up on was empty.
Some said he moved west.
Others claimed he was staying with relatives 2 counties over. It hardly mattered. His absence did not erase what he had seen, or what he had failed to do. In interviews, psychologists began using the case as a study in bystander paralysis, how fear compresses judgment, how youth magnifies hesitation, how the brain, when confronted with sudden violence, often chooses self-preservation over intervention. Experts spoke in measured tones about neural pathways and stress responses. But in Maple Hollow, the explanation felt too clinical. People didn't debate neurology at the diner counter. They asked simpler questions. Would I have called? Would I have stepped out of the car? Would I have run toward the sound instead of away from it? The questions lingered longer than any headline. Thomas Keller's health began to decline that summer. Word filtered back through official channels, complications routine for a man his age under prison conditions, nothing dramatic. He requested no visits. Filed no appeals. The man who once tried to manage the narrative with careful wording had gone silent again, this time not as strategy, but as surrender. There were rumors he had begun attending a small chapel service inside the facility, that he sat in the back row, hands folded, eyes down. No one confirmed it. It was simply a story that circulated, as stories do when people look for meaning in aftermath. Mark Delaney kept his distance from all of it. He changed jobs, changed routines, avoided interviews. His role had been legally defined and served, but his name would always be footnoted in the larger arc of the cold case. Not the architect, not the witness. The one who arrived later, shovel in hand, and asked no questions. And Ruth Harper. Ruth began to change in ways that were less visible but more profound. For decades, her life had revolved around absence. A missing chair at the table. A bedroom preserved in suspended time. Holidays shaped around a question mark. After the confession, after the excavation, after the witness stepped forward, the absence shifted shape. It was no longer undefined. It had edges now. She started volunteering at the County Crisis Center, answering phones for people in moments of fear or confusion. She never mentioned her daughter, unless asked directly. When callers hesitated, unsure whether what they were seeing or hearing warranted intervention, Ruth's voice remained steady. If something feels wrong, she would say, trust that feeling. Don't wait for someone else to decide it matters. The advice was simple. It carried the weight of 32 years. Late one evening in July, Detective Alvarez received a letter forwarded from the correctional facility. Handwritten.
Sparse.
Thomas Keller's name printed in block letters at the top. It was addressed not to Ruth, not to the court, but to Maple Hollow. I cannot undo what I did, the letter began. I cannot undo what I chose not to do. I am not writing for forgiveness. I am writing because there were 2 moments that night when something could have changed. The first was mine. The second was not. Both ended the same way. Alvarez read the sentence twice. There were 2 moments. He did not elaborate. He did not accuse Mercer directly. He did not deflect blame. He simply acknowledged the fracture in time, 2 points where intervention might have altered the outcome. The letter ended with a line that would circulate through town like a final, unwanted echo. Silence is not neutral. Alvarez placed the letter in the case archive, alongside soil analysis reports and faded photographs and typed transcripts from 1992.
The file was thick now, complete in a legal sense,
but layered with human hesitation. That autumn, the town council voted unanimously to rename the small access road leading to Miller's Field. It would no longer be an unnamed gravel path. It would be Harper Lane. The ceremony was modest. A new street sign, green and reflective, bolted into place. Ruth stood beside it, one hand resting lightly on the post.
There were no speeches about tragedy.
Only acknowledgement. Names matter, the mayor said quietly. We choose what we remember. As the crowd dispersed, a group of high school students lingered near the sign, reading it, glancing toward the field beyond. They had grown up hearing fragments of the story. Now they had inherited its full shape. The cold case that once symbolized failure had become something else, an uneasy but powerful reminder that justice is not a single event. It is a chain of decisions, some made in anger, some in fear, some in courage. On the 33rd anniversary of Emily Harper's disappearance, the field stood open under a pale October sky. No cameras, no reporters, just wind moving steadily across grass that had known too much. Ruth walked the perimeter slowly, not searching, not grieving in the old way, but observing. The place no longer felt like a crime scene. It felt like ground reclaimed, not erased, not purified, but understood. She stopped near the tree line where Keller had once dug. She did not kneel. She did not close her eyes. She simply stood. For a long time, she said softly to no one in particular, I thought the worst thing was not knowing. The wind shifted. But the worst thing, she continued, was believing no one saw. Now she knew someone had, and that knowledge, painful as it was, altered the landscape of her memory. Emily had not vanished into total darkness. There had been eyes on that field, a witness to her fight. Even if that witness failed her, he had existed. The difference mattered. As dusk settled, headlights flickered on along the distant highway. For a brief moment, the field glowed under passing beams, light sweeping across grass, across earth, across history. Then the cars moved on. The light receded. But this time, the darkness that followed did not feel absolute. Because Maple Hollow had learned what happens when silence lingers too long. It hardens. It buries. It distorts. And it had also learned something else, that even after 30 years, even after fear calcifies into habit, even after a case goes cold and colder still, truth can surface. Not gently, not cleanly, but completely. The story that began with a disappearance in 1992 no longer belonged only to a killer or a witness or a grieving mother. It belonged to a town that had faced the worst version of itself and chosen, finally, not to look away. Cold case. Confession. Witness. Consequence. For words that once read like headlines, now they read like warning.